everyone, it's Nat from Nextwork here, and today we are going live with Project 4 of the 7-Day DevOps Challenge. A warm welcome to everyone that's tuning in live and to everyone that is also tuning in, watching the recording afterwards. I hope you've been having fun with the 7-Day DevOps Challenge. You're up to day 4 now, which is crazy. This is like the midpoint of the 7-Day DevOps Challenge, and you really get to see automation starting to come through now. So a lot of milestone moments that are going to happen in this project today. I'm super excited to be doing this with you. All right, so today's project is called Continuous Integration with CodeBuild. Now you don't need to know what these words mean. Like continuous integration is a bit of a spicy word. We've got CodeBuild, which is a new service here. So nothing to be afraid of. Continuous integration, you might notice, is actually CI, the CI part of a CI/CD pipeline. So the moment you're done with this project, you're definitely at least halfway through of your CI/CD pipeline. So something to celebrate for sure. All right, and we've got H in the chat here. Hello, hello, welcome. It's good to see you. All right. So shall we get to know continuous integration a little bit? Shall we get to know CodeBuild a little bit? We're gonna get ready to do this project, and as you can see, I was so mad that this image for some reason wasn't loading, so I have it open in a new tab for you. But in this project, we are up to this section of our CI/CD pipeline. Now, what this section is showing you is that you have now ticked off your development environment. That's our first project. You've ticked off GitHub in the middle here. That's our second project, and GitHub is storing all of your web apps code. And then you have CodeArtifact, which was yesterday's project, project 3 of this series, where you were storing your web apps dependencies and all of these packages in an artifact repository. So we have these 3 parts set up now. So part 1, where you write the code, part 2, where you store the code, and part 3, where you store dependencies for your code or for your web app. So what's part 4 gonna be about? Like, we've done a lot to set up our web app already. So part 4 is actually about building the app. Now, building is a bit of an interesting concept because I think we get used to running code in our local computer and just opening it up maybe in Google Chrome or some sort of browser and be like, okay, yeah, you know, my web app checks out. I can see my web app, done. But when you actually look at the production environment or what happens in the real world, web apps, you can't really just open this random file in your local computer and you're like, okay, done, my users can see this. That's not really how it works in the real world. You have your development environment to see your files locally, but you also need to have a production environment where you put all of your code into like a separate space, and that code correlates to what your users see. So in order to put your code out in front of the world, you actually need to build it. Okay, so that's where this entire building process comes from. You need to build your web app so that you are compressing your web app into a file that another EC2 instance, another server, can deploy and make available to your users. So that's this whole second half of this CI/CD pipeline, or I would say that this key part of the CI/CD pipeline happens. You know, you have this left side of the diagram that's about creating your web app and storing the code. And then I would say this second half, including CodeBuild, is more about actually making your code available to people, available to users. And where CodeBuild comes in today's project is it is actually that building process, that compressing of your code into a package. That's all we're gonna do today. We are just making sure that the code you make can be compressed into this nice little package so that in the next project, Code Deploy can grab that package and then deploy your app. So I hope you're excited. I'm super excited. CodeBuild comes with some spicy new services as well. It's not just CodeBuild we're gonna be meeting today. There's also another service we're meeting today called Code Connection. And Code Connection is all about integrating GitHub into your AWS environment. So I'm excited for us to get to know Code Connection too. Cool. So this is literally what I mentioned, but in text format. I just wanted to call out that something I haven't mentioned too much yet is that the fact that it's a continuous integration service. And that's the thing that this definition really highlights for us. So I'm just gonna give it a cute little pink highlight. And a continuous integration service is all about automating that build process. And there's a reason why automate is bolded, because that's what continuous integration means. It means you're no longer doing that compiling of your code into this little package manually. You're actually every time you make changes to your code, what if that new compressed file just gets generated automatically for you, so you don't need to run the commands for it? And that's why CodeBuild is so cool, because it's going to become that service that automates that process for us, so we don't need to worry about it and really spend more time writing the code for our web app. Cool. Okay. Now, you might be new to the 7-Day DevOps Challenge. So if that's you, I thought here we can have a little intro to the 7-Day DevOps Challenge. And across 7 days, we'll be building 7 projects. And those 7 projects will let us build from scratch this CI/CD pipeline that automates the build, that's CodeBuild, and deployment, which is going to be the next project, of a web app. So CodeBuild and CodeDeploy are like the 2 really key services in our CI/CD pipeline. And then in the final project of these 7 days, you're going to learn that this parent kind of service called Code Pipeline that ties everything together. So I'd highly recommend that after you do this project, plan out when you're going to do the next one to complete the entire series. This whole portfolio of 7 projects looks amazing in a DevOps project portfolio. Cool beans. So let's get started with step-by-step guidance today. And before we get started, let's first recap a little bit of what we just talked about and plan what we're going to do in this project. A big hello to everyone. Oh, H says good morning. Hey, H. Good morning to you. And Mario, welcome back. It's good to see you. Niobi, this is like our 3rd time. So I'm like super impressed. Thanks so much for joining. And really appreciate the lovely vibes in the chat, everyone. This is so cool. I am really excited for us to build that CodeBuild part of the series today. And let's keep it up. Let's keep it up. Power to you. And thanks so much for spending the time with me to do this project live. All right. So in this project, we will demonstrate how to use AWS CodeBuild to automate the build process in the CI/CD pipeline. Building means compressing our web apps files into a small, well, not small, but technically just into a single compressed file, like a zip file, that the next stage that we can later deploy. This project is just going to focus on CodeBuild and creating that compressed file automatically. Ooh, automatically. Deploying it comes in the next project. All right, so that's the plan for today. Are you excited? I sure am. CodeBuild is awesome. Now, this project and the speed that I'm going in today's demo does assume that we've done days 1 to 3 of the 7-Day DevOps Challenge together now. So that does not mean we're going to skip the setup that we've created in days 1 to 3. It just means that this demo is going to run a little bit faster. And we've also reshuffled the way you do the setup so that it works a bit more efficiently now that you've done it before. But if you haven't tried those projects yet and you're thinking, oh, this is actually my first project in the 7-Day DevOps Challenge, is that going to be okay? Just know that you're totally welcome here. That's still totally possible. And we actually have a special tab made just for you if this is the first time you're doing a project in the 7-Day DevOps Challenge. So get ready for some extra setup time if this is that first project for you. But you can definitely still complete this project. Okay. So we're going to get started now with setting up the development instance. You would have done this before if you've done the first 3 projects of the 7-Day DevOps Challenge. So this time we have written the step to be a bit more of a mini challenge for you to see whether or not you can do some of these steps on your own now. But in the meantime, let's recap. When you set up your development environment, what you're doing is you're launching an EC2 instance. So you've got this instance here that's your computer in the cloud, and we are launching it because we want to use it to write our web apps code. So our web apps code is going to be living inside here. And when we launch that instance, there's 2 things we need to set up. One is the permissions. You need to launch a key pair as well. You need to create this key pair so that you have the permission to actually unlock and use that instance. Second thing we need to set up is some networking settings. So your instance is going to need to be able to open up a path between you, your computer, and that instance itself. So it's going to be a little bit clearer when we set up this instance, but basically it looks like making sure that there is a network setting in your instance that allows SSH traffic from you. And we're still going to go through that step by step together. Now, after you create that instance, what we're going to do next in this step is that we're going to actually connect to that instance. We're going to use that key pair we create to walk up to this virtual computer in the cloud and unlock it and go inside and set it up so that we can create our web app in there. All right, so let's get started. Let's dive right in. We have split up the setup for your development environment into 4 key milestones. So this is going to be a mini challenge for everyone that's done this setup before, because you would have done it maybe 3 times now if you've done projects 1 to 3 of the 7-Day DevOps Challenge. So your challenge is that we've written out the 4 milestones in front of you. The 4 milestones is to launch an EC2 instance, SSH connect to your EC2 instance via VS Code, and then you need to install some tools like Maven, Java, and Git in the instance before you clone your web app code. We've done all of this before, but no worries if you're thinking like, oh, these steps are still a little vague to me. We have also written matching steps, step-by-step guidance for every single milestone here that you can visit, and you can check off one by one as you complete the setup in this step. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to demo how we can go through each of those 4 milestones. But if you want to take on this challenge, I highly recommend it. Challenging yourself to do things without guidance is so helpful for learning things as well. But you're so welcome to pause this demo if you'd like, or just mute me. And then you can try see if you can do these milestones by yourself before looking at step-by-step guidance. All right, but I'm just going to be going through each step step by step together. So follow along if you'd like to have a bit closer guidance today. And like I mentioned, if you haven't done projects 1 to 3 yet, we have even more explanations and guidance for you ready in this tab. And I will use this tab for sure if this is my first project in the entire series. Okay, cool beans. Okay, so to kick things off with our development environment, the first thing is to launch an EC2 instance, and we need to connect to it via SSH. Let's just focus on launching the EC2 instance for now. To do that, we're going to start by logging into our AWS Management Console. So I have logged in here. Make sure you've logged in too. Okay, I'm logging in with the user that I've been using for every project in this series, which is my DevOps admin. And I'm going to sneakily chuck this step-by-step guide to the to the right-hand side of this demo today so that we can have both screens up at the same time. Okay. All right, and then we're gonna go into the EC2 console. And you are going to launch an instance. And then this is our development instance. Very cool. So if you've done the first 3 projects in this series, you might notice, oh, look at these steps. They're so much more concise. They sure are. These steps are going to become more and more concise as we progress throughout this series because it's always good to try challenge yourself and try see if you can do as much as you can without guidance on every single part. And that's why the setup steps that you've done before is going to look smaller and smaller and smaller, so more of that is guided by yourself. And in this case, we just have launching your EC2 instance and a list of settings that you should follow. You can definitely still do this with me. So in this case, whoa, that's the wrong thing I copied. You can launch your EC2 instance with the following settings here. Oh, I wonder why this isn't copying today. So we can go next for DevOps username should be the name of your EC2 instance, and replace your name, of course, with your own name. Got to get that EC2 instance to recognize you. Okay, add your name in here. And then we are going to just make sure that your AMI is free tier eligible. And your instance type is free tier eligible as well, so you don't get charged for today's project. And of course, that's like these steps already done in terms of launching the EC2 instance. Okay, tick, tick, tick. And then you have a key pair that you can also use. So as you can see, I have a cheeky Nextwork DevOps key pair already here. I think it's probably because I was just setting up something right before this project, but I'm gonna just delete that key pair now so we can start from the same place. Cool. Let me just cheekily delete that key pair that already exists so I can start from the top with everyone. All right, and let's go back. Oops. Oopsie daisies. Okay, so to create a key pair, you can select create new key pair here and call it Nextwork DevOps as your key pair name. Do you remember what a key pair is for? If you don't remember, the key pair is basically that key that gives you access to the virtual computer you're about to launch. Just like how when you log into a physical computer, you usually have to type in a password. The key pair is pretty much like that credentials or authentication method. You need to give them your private key, which gets set up when you create your key pair. And if you don't do this, it's going to be really hard for you to connect to your own EC2 instance. So we're going to make sure that we do that today. We're going to make sure that we create that key pair. Cool. Okay. So we got the AMI set up, the instance type set up, and then let's create that new key pair called Nextwork-DevOps. And then we are going to create that now. Create key pair. All right. Now for allowing SSH traffic, do you remember what setting we're supposed to use? The correct setting is to go for your IP because it's the most secure setting that's out there. If you allow traffic from anywhere, that basically means anyone that can connect to an EC2 instance, so anyone with a terminal pretty much, will be able to try to attempt to connect to your instance. And that's just not very, very safe. We're going to make sure that our instance will only accept traffic from yourself. So that's why we got my IP set up. And let's launch the instance. That's it. Yeah, it's crazy. Like I think every time you repeat a step, you just get faster and faster. This step probably took us more than 10 minutes the first time we did it. And look at us now. So pretty cool. And if this is your first time launching an instance and you're seeing this and you think, oh, you'd rather have more guidance in the demo, just know that we actually have step-by-step guidance through all of these projects, starting from project 1 in our YouTube channel. So I'd recommend checking out the description box or checking out our YouTube channel to get the live project demos for those projects too. Okay, now EC2 instance launched. That's a success state, okay? Looks good. So now that our EC2 instance is launched, we've got a computer that's in the cloud and ready for us to connect to it. Let's jump to the next tab for some steps on connecting to that instance. And we can also do a happy tick for that first milestone. Awesome. So next up, let's connect to our instance. Very cool. Now, are you familiar with SSH? SSH is basically a way for you to connect to a existing virtual computer or a remote server is what we call it. SSH is also a type of traffic, so it's a way for you to send data between you and the other computer. You might be very, very familiar with HTTPS traffic because it's at the start of a lot of links. You might be like, oh, HTTPS, I think you've seen this before. So HTTPS traffic is more like traffic between you and a web server, and then SSH is like traffic between you and then any other kind of virtual computer that you decide to launch. SSH can also be done with not just virtual computers, but also physical servers. But that's a little bit of a rabbit hole. So we'll just go ahead and set up a connection to our EC2 instance now. Okay. Now to set up that connection, don't forget we've got ourselves, we've got a key, and then we've launched the instance. So what SSH connection looks like is just you holding the key, walking to your instance, and then unlocking the instance. And we're going to be doing that by running a few commands in the terminal. Okay, so to set up our key, this file would have been downloaded when you created your key pair. And we're going to be putting this key pair in a very secure place. Your downloads folder is not the most safest place out there. Like, I feel like it's very easy for you to accidentally like, oops, I deleted something, you know, because I was clearing out my downloads folder. So we're just going to go to our desktop. Okay, and in your desktop, set up a DevOps folder here. And then move this file that you downloaded when you created your key pair over to your DevOps folder like this. Okay, and that's our private key. So that's the key to unlock your instance. Now that you're here, you can start to use VS Code in your local computer to run the commands for connecting to this instance. Again, I'm going through the more efficient way of setting up today's project because we've done projects 1 to 3 together. So if you'd like more detailed guidance, check out the live for project 1 of this series. All right. You've got VS Code open, you've got an extension set up for SSH. If you don't have it, don't forget to install it by going into the extensions marketplace and then installing remote SSH, this little guy here. Okay, and then once you're here, all we gotta do is click on that remote SSH arrow and select connect to host. Okay, we're gonna try connect to an EC2 instance now. So you're going to see that there are some details here already if you've tried connecting to an EC2 instance in the previous projects. We don't want these settings anymore because we just launched a new EC2 instance. We're like, oh, it's all right. Like these were the details for yesterday's or the previous project's EC2 instances, but we've moved on now. We're going to say goodbye to this EC2 instance details that existed that was amazing for the last project. And we're going to clear out those details. We're going to say thank you for your service, but we're now moving on to a new instance. Okay, so because of that, we're just going to be adding in the details for that new instance that we launched today. Click into that instance that you launched. So we're going to click into the instance. Oh, come on. There we go. So select that checkbox next to it. And it's going to pop up this cool little details panel where you can find the address of your instance, public IPv4 DNS. We're going to copy that DNS address, and you need to paste that twice. So first in the host area and second time in the host name area. Now I know this is not going to look the same for you if this is your very, very first time connecting via SSH to an instance. You might see something else instead. So I'm going to demo what that other thing looks like, so that if that's what you see, just know that it's completely normal. So that was the setup settings for if you had an EC2 instance already like configured in there. But what if you didn't? You know, what if this is your first time using SSH connections? You would click on connect to host, and you wouldn't see any existing EC2 instance. You just see an add new SSH host kind of option, kind of button. So all you got to do here is actually click into it, and you need to run a fancy command called an SSHI command so that you can connect to it. What that command looks like this. It goes SSH-I, and then you put in the path to your private key. So for myself, this was the path to my private key. You would go users, Natasha Ong, desktop, DevOps, network, DevOps.pen. Okay, so you've got this path that exists in the terminal that takes anyone, like for example, in this case, it'll take VS Code all the way to the private key file that you've created. And if you don't know what that path looks like, if you're like, oh, I don't really know how to write that path, all you gotta do is open up your terminal and see how you can use CD for Linux or dir if you're using Windows to navigate to your private key. So in my case, here my terminal is starting in the downloads folder. So you will go CD back 2 times, and then now it's going to start from the root repository of my computer. And then once you're here, you would run CD again to run the commands to navigate your terminal into the DevOps folder and grab that path to your private key. So in this case, don't forget, we set everything up in the desktop. There we go. So you would go cd desktop to get to your desktop. And then you would run cd DevOps to go navigate your terminal into the DevOps folder. And then you would run ls here. You would run ls here so that you can see that your terminal can now find your private key file, which is network.devops.pem. So that's basically telling your terminal how to get to this file using a path. So when you have that, when you've realized that you've navigated your terminal into your private key file, what you can do is run pwd like this to get that full path. Okay, so now you can just copy that full path that you found, copy that, and then paste that here, okay, to get to the exact same place where I did. So you just paste that full path, and then you just make sure you have a slash to specifically mention that it's your private key that you want to use today. So you've got your private key in this command, and then you're going to tell SSH that you're just logging into this specific instance. So you're going to again copy the address for that instance and paste that here and run it and select your configuration file to get there. Okay, so this is the second way that you could have gotten to the exact same place that I did just now. The first way was to just edit an existing file if you already connected to an EC2 instance before. The second way is to run that special SSHI command, and both ways are mentioned in the project guide as well if you like more guidance. Cool? So cool. Once we're ready, and we're now ready to connect to the host. So click on connect to host now. And now you've got your EC2 instance as the top option, so you can click into it and connect to your EC2 instance. Okay, so here we go. Iconic. So sometimes you might run into an error like this. And I actually know, oh my gosh, this is fun. I actually know exactly why I can't establish a connection. There was a step that I missed when I was doing all of this SSH setup. I would love for everyone in the chat to have a go at thinking about why did my connection fail if you've done this before. So what I did so far is I put my SSH, I put my private key into my desktop and I made sure it was in the DevOps folder. And then I went straight to VS Code, edited my config file and just said, hey, instead of the previous instance, can I use my new instance address, my new EC2 instance's address? And here we have an error that says I could not establish the connection to my EC2 instance. This error comes up a lot actually for the Nextweek community, so I'm really glad I'm running into it here. It's a great one to troubleshoot together. Very cool. I'm actually so glad I ran into this one. And yeah, we've got a genius in the chat today, because H is completely on the money there. It is because of the permissions on my private key. H, I'm so hyped, man. I still remember the very first project that we did together, and we were just literally talking about how can we like set up permissions in the key pair, and now you're identifying it for me. So yeah, that's like a whole evolution, man. I'm really excited. So that's correct. So what H has mentioned there is that you need to have permissions to even use your private key. All I've done so far is I downloaded it and chucked it in a folder. But turns out you actually need to run a special command that tells your computer to change the permission settings for this file. Every single file that you download comes with permission settings, whether you see it or not. And sometimes you need to use the terminal to actually edit those permission settings. All right, so editing the permission settings is actually a one-line thing as well. So nothing to be afraid of. All you gotta do is open up a terminal inside your VS Code window. So now that you've opened up the terminal, again, we're gonna do that navigation game and try to navigate all the way to our private key file. So for myself, I need to go to my desktop, go inside my DevOps folder, and you can run ls again to check, do you have your private key inside? Okay, so once you've got it sorted, what you can do next is run a command that tells your terminal that we're going to give ourselves the permission to use that file. That permission, that command in Linux is called chmod 400, and we mention it here. Okay, so this is the command for Linux, And I noticed that we don't have the command from Windows within this banner here. So that's a little oopsie on my part. You can try ask, what is the Windows equivalent for chmod 400? Next work key pair .pen. There we go. So this is the Windows equivalent if you're feeling a little stuck and you're like, oh, I want the Windows instructions. Here it is. ICL. What is that name? ICACL. I usually call it like CACLS, but it's probably not the right way to pronounce it. But these commands are completely right. What you would do is you would again navigate your terminal to the correct folder, the DevOps folder, and then run this set of commands to change the permission settings and let you use it. Okay, so those are the Windows commands. I'm going to be running the Linux or the Mac OS commands. Okay, and now that I have permission, that's it. You have permission now to use your private key. The connection should work. What do you think? Do you think I'm going to connect this time? Did we resolve the error? Not yet. Okay, this is interesting. Let's see what happened here. So sometimes if you still see you could not establish a connection, what I think of next is like, all right, I'm gonna want to see more detailed reasons why I still can't connect to it. So what you can do here is you can actually try run that SSH command locally in your terminal. And that usually gives you more detailed reasons if you can't connect to it via SSH. Shall we give that a go? So here you would actually run the command SSH-I, and again, what is that path that you've put in your configuration? Use that same path, okay? And then you're gonna run the rest of that command, which is to log in to this exact instance that you've launched. Okay, run that and see whether the connection is okay. All right, so here it says, you know, are you sure you want to continue connecting? This looks a little shady to me. It's my first time seeing this instance. And we're like, yes, we want to connect. And we actually connected fine. Okay, so that was interesting. Our instance connected fine. Shall we try our VS Code one more time? I might just close this. Should I close this? Yeah, I'll close this and try it one more time. Okay, so I'm going to open VS Code again and see if I can run that SSH connection one more time. Is it working? Then it worked. That's fuzzy. And actually, that is so true about a lot of these steps that you might see in VS Code and GitHub and AWS. If you run into the error, the first thing you kind of do is just do the same thing again and quit. Just quit everything, redo it, and sometimes it just works afterwards. And that's usually because VS Code could have been saving an old thing that I wasn't aware of, and you need to quit it to reset. But anyway, we've connected now, so whew, that's good. So we can jump to the next tab. Jump to the next tab up top. Oops. So we can jump to the next tab like this to continue setting up. By the way, H, thanks so much for the shout out. That's super sweet of you. Are you going to be taking on the challenge of trying to set up as much as you can without guidance? I'm very curious. Or maybe we can do it together, you know, for reals in like projects 6 and 7, you know, the last 2 projects of the series. Zooming on ahead though, we've now connected to our EC2 instance. So what that means is every single command that we now run does not affect our local computer anymore. If I install something now with a command, I'm not installing it into my local computer, this physical one in front of me. I'm installing it into the EC2 instance. And you can even see that your command prompt now tells you that you're inside your instance now. I just love this moment because there is this virtual computer living out there somewhere, and your computer is actually running commands that affects that computer, you know, that's so distant from us. Yeah, the crazy thing is, the region I'm using is Ohio in the US, and even if I'm not physically in Ohio, I'm technically controlling a computer that's in Ohio right now. So that's really like the power of an EC2 instance. You can just run all of these commands and control computers that might be far, far away from you, and it's still gonna work. Okay, so now that we're here, we can now install a few tools that helps us with creating the web app, and that's Maven, Java, Git. I'm gonna be flying through the installation here because we've gone through this in detail in project 1 of the series and project 2 as well. So if you're new, I'd recommend checking out those project guides. And yeah, Maven, in short, Maven is like the project builder and the package manager. So the importance of Maven is that it handles a lot of the actual building and the running of the code. Java is literally the programming language we're using today. So if you don't have Java installed, you won't be able to run any of the code that you write. And that's going to be a problem. So we definitely need to install Java, the programming language, as well. Next up is Git, which is something that we learned from project 2 of this 7-day DevOps challenge series. And Git is our version control system. So we really need to install it because using Git is what helps us with pulling code that we've already written in previous projects and making sure that the new progress we make today can also get pushed upwards to our code repository. Otherwise, the changes you make to your web app today don't get saved. So we're going to want to use Git to just save the changes that we make. Cool beans. So that Java command is running very, very nicely now. It means that I'm installing Java fine. And then you can install Git last. So Maven, Java, Git. Let's install them all. So good. Okay, so to double check if you've got everything correct, what we're going to do is we're going to verify the version numbers of each one. So for Maven, the command for checking that version is called mvn-v. Okay, and then we can see that you have a Maven version here. Good stuff, okay? Maven was installed correctly. Next up, let's check Java. So this one is java-version. And you can see you've got a Java version number. That means Java was also installed correctly. Last one, Git. So let's check if Git was installed correctly too. Oh, and I ran the wrong command for that. I can see there's a little typo in the Git version command. Do you know what that is? Can you tell? I'm gonna give you a few seconds to have a look at this as well. A very, very common little oopsie. Can you tell what went wrong here? So the command prompt, this here actually tells us why we went wrong. It says usage git -v or -- version. Those are the correct commands to actually check the version of Git. What was the command I ran? Git -version, which isn't actually either of these options. I should have gone with -- or I should have just gone with -v. So let's correct my silly little mistake there. And let's say I go with git -v. And there we go. Now the git version command works. So always look at your terminal response if you ever run a command and you're like, why didn't that work? -v or -- version is absolutely correct. And Job is on the money there. So nice work. But that is our tools all installed. Very nice. Let's tick that off. And that means we've got an EC2 instance now. We're connected to that instance now, so every command we run affects that instance. And we've also installed some tools that helps us with building a web app. Now what's next for us is to clone the code that we've created from projects 1 to 3 of the series. Pretty exciting. I really like this part because this is a part where you really see the power of storing your code in GitHub. Instead of having to write everything from scratch, we can just pull in our progress from the first 3 projects and kickstart from there. Now, if this is actually your first project, don't worry. This tab here about being new to this series, if you click on I haven't done projects 1 to 3 yet, we don't assume that you've written any code in GitHub before. So this will give you all the guidance that you need to set up from scratch. In our case, because we've done this ain't our first rodeo, what we can do is we can copy the code that we've written in the previous projects. So let's head to our repository, and if you heard that alarm, man, that actually stopped my heart for a second. I was like, oh, what do we do? But it's gone now. Did you guys hear the alarm, or does it sound like I'm like speaking nonsense? All right. So what you can do next is you can check out your repository. So visit your repository, and you can, go to github.com if you'd like, and you can, I'm gonna switch over to my account so that you can find your repositories here. All right. Okay, and once you are visiting your GitHub account, there you go. This is the repository that we set up, in the previous project. So let's click into that. And as you can see all of the code that you've written in previous projects all here already. What a time saver, isn't it? What a time saver. So in this case, all we got to do is clone the code that we've written in the past. How do we do this? We do this by going into that code button, that bright green button here, and then we copy that code. You know how it says copy URL? Copy that, and we're going to go into our terminal and run git clone. Git clone tells the terminal that I want to copy some code, and I'm going to use git to copy the code. And that's the reason why it is such a good idea that we installed git. So git clone and paste the link to your GitHub repository that you copied, run that, and you're cloning it now. So good, isn't it? Now that you have cloned it, that means your existing code is living in your EC2 instance now. You've made that copy, it's now inside your EC2 instance, and all you gotta do is click on open folder here to open it up. All right, so we've got Nextweek Web Project as an option. Click into that and click OK, and ta-da! Give yourself a pat on the back, because now all the code that you've written in the previous projects are showing up in front of you. So click on Yes, I Trust the Authors. If you see this pop up, it just tells VS Code that this code can be trusted. And yeah, open up the code that you've written in the previous projects. Ah, so good. No need to write everything from scratch anymore. It's right here now. And I thought I'd call out that this is project 4. Oh, yeah, this is project 4 in the 7-day DevOps challenge. And you might notice that we just have the code from projects 1 and 2. Where's the code from project 3? Hello? Did you remember that we also wrote new code in project 3? In project 3, we were connecting to CodeArtifact, and we had to write this file called settings.xml in order to connect Maven with CodeArtifact. I don't know if you remember that piece of code, but it's called settings.xml, and we had to put that in the root of our repository. It was like sitting here. It's not here. Why is that? Because we didn't push the code. Last time we wrote the code, it hung out in our local repository, and then we deleted the instance. We did not push the code back into our GitHub repository. So that's why it doesn't live in this clone piece of code here. So before we finish today, we're going to make sure that we actually push all of the code that we write so that the next project just truly picks up from where we left off last time. And you know what? I have no regrets. I like that we didn't save settings.xml, because now we have the joy of writing it again. And since it was the previous project, it's good to have that refresher. Okay, but just like that, we have done the setup for projects 1 and 2 of the series, and now it's just project 3 left, and setup is going to be a lot easier in this step compared to when we had to do the entire project, because we've, again, streamlined all of the setup into something that's a bit easier for us. Cool. So just like the previous step, we're now onto CodeArtifact, which is about actually storing all of the packages and dependencies of our web app. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create our CodeArtifact repository and connect it with our web app. This, again, correlates to project 3 of the series. So if you see that I'm going through this setup really, really quickly, you're more than welcome to check out that project and set it up from scratch there. Cool. Okay. Are we ready? How are you feeling? Now, the 4 milestones with CodeArtifact setup is that you have to create your CodeArtifact repository on AWS. You need to set up some IAM permissions to make sure your EC2 instance can actually access CodeArtifact. And then we're going to be completing some connection settings between CodeArtifact and Maven. Cool? Let's start by creating that CodeArtifact repository. So CodeArtifact repositories are very, very simple to set up, actually. It's more the connection that takes a bit of time. So here, what you gotta do is search it and search for CodeArtifact like this, and open CodeArtifact in a new tab. Okay, so once you're at CodeArtifact, I see. Am I currently in Ohio? I am in Ohio. All right, heads up team, you're gonna see that I might have some resources already in here. I made the silly mistake of not checking which region I was in, and I was like, oh man, the region that's ready for us in this project is the Oregon region, but I've already set up everything in Ohio so far, so you're gonna see me just like mad deleting things as we go, which I hope is okay, guys. So let me just delete this first. And then delete this one. Oh, this is gonna be a bit comedic today. You're gonna see me just delete things and then we're gonna set it up from scratch again. But I hope you don't mind, because now my CodeArtifact might look like your CodeArtifact because it's totally empty. And let us create the repository now. So when we create the repository, we're gonna name it super simple, nextwork-devops-CI/CD. And you can give it a cheeky little description as well. Okay, we're gonna call it the repository for Nextwork's CI/CD artifacts. I'll be a bit clearer here. I would say stores packages that our Java web app needs in order to function. And before you forget, don't forget to set up a public upstream repository. And it's Maven Central Store. That's our upstream repository. Cool. And let's head next and set up a domain as well. So it's going to be this AWS account, and our domain name is Nextwork, like this. Next up, we can start creating the repository. That's it. We just create the repository, just select create, and you're done. Okay, so what we've set up there was one setup process, but it actually created 3 things in the background. It created a repository called nextwork-devops-CI/CD. Aha, this is what we created in that, the first thing we created in that flow. This CodeArtifact repository is going to be storing all of the dependencies and the packages that your web app needs. Do you remember what packages mean? Packages are actually external pieces of code that other people have written before in the past, and they like chucked it online. They're like, hey, this piece of code is pretty reusable. Someone else can actually use it to help with kickstarting what they're building and, you know, make their web app building process even faster. It's kind of like if someone just made some really good pasta sauce and they're like, yo, this pasta sauce is so good, I should actually like sell it so that other people can make pasta with this, and like they don't need to worry about making pasta sauce. So like someone else has written some packages in the past, they put it online, and you're like, oh, these are some good packages. These packages will kickstart our like project or web app building process. And the cool thing is, Maven and Java, when you work together, when you put them together to build your Java web app, which is what we've done, they help you with deciding what packages you need. So in the background, you're like, this is gonna be the look of my code. You know, I'm gonna have a heading here, I'm gonna have like blah, blah, blah here. So you define the look and feel of your web app. And then Maven is capable of, in the background, seeing like, oh, okay, you want this, you want this, you want this. So in that case, we need these packages in order to make it work. And then Maven decides to look for those packages on your behalf, grab those packages on your behalf, put them in your environment on your behalf, so that when you run your code, it works. So a repository, which is what we've created with CodeArtifact here, is your artifacts repository. So now when Maven's like, oh, we gotta get all of these packages for the web app to work, Every time Maven needs to grab those packages, it takes time. Like Maven has to go to the internet, has to request it, download it, put it in your environment. So the CodeArtifact repository is kind of like a storage box for all of the packages Maven knows you need. So that next time Maven downloads something from the internet, it actually saves a copy in this repository. So that next time Maven needs to go and look for the same package, it doesn't need to go online anymore. It can just go straight to your local repository, which is safer because you now bypass like going to some shady internet space and more into your own local repository space, which is more secure and more fast. So that was what we set up in a nutshell in yesterday's project. And what we've done now is we've created the repository. So now that we've created it, what's next for us is to just connect to it. Okay, this repository is living somewhere, but it's not actually connected to your web app, right? Like all we've done is we've set it up inside AWS, and in that entire setup process, we have not once mentioned our web app. So the connection between our web app and the repository actually has to happen next. We've created the repository, let's connect them now. What we're gonna do is we're gonna click into this repository that you've created, and we're gonna click on View Connection Instructions here, so that you can see how you can connect your web app to your CodeArtifact repository. We're all going to be picking Mac and Linux today because Mac and Linux is the OS for your EC2 instance. So even if you're doing this project on a Windows physical computer in front of you, your EC2 instance is a Linux instance. So please choose Linux here. Don't forget that whenever you run commands in your terminal now, you're not running it for your local computer. You're running it for your instance. And that's why we respect our EC2 instance's operating system and choose Linux always. And then we're going to pick Maven as our package manager. And here are the steps for connecting. Does this look familiar by any chance? If you've done yesterday's project, we literally just did this yesterday. So if you've been following along the series, so it's very fun to be looking at this again, but this time with the context that you've got from the previous project. You might know what's coming ahead. Okay, the first thing that comes ahead is to actually give your EC2 instance the permission to access CodeArtifact. Because if you were to just run these commands straight away, you're like, all the code to connect is right in front of you. Let me go trigger happy and just start running these commands. This is what's gonna happen if you do that. So if you're like, oh yay, commands are here, let's run them straight away. You run that first one, and it's going to tell you that you don't have credentials. Okay, EC2 instances by default don't have access to CodeArtifact repositories. Your instance by default cannot access a CodeArtifact repository you've set up. And that's really for security reasons. There's a security principle out there called the principle of least privilege in AWS, and it's this principle that says if your instance doesn't need it, or if this resource doesn't need that permission, we're not going to give it by default. You're only going to provide permissions if that resource says that they need it. So our instance definitely needs access to CodeArtifact, so that's the reason why we're now going to give it the access. And to give it the access, we need to visit our handy security service called IAM, which is the service that's kind of like this, the service that decides who has access to what. IAM is that security service that looks out for all the resources in your account, and it says, your EC2 instance has access to this, and we're going to want to say, oh, can we also give it access to CodeArtifact? That would be nice. So we're going to open up IAM here. And while we're waiting, a big shout out to everyone that says they heard the alarm 10 minutes ago. I know that would have been scary, eh? Git push in case of a fire. Damn, thanks for the reminder, actually. That's so true. Yeah, so that's the cool thing about GitHub, In case a fire broke out, I could just quickly git push and it'll run out the window, and at least my code's gonna live somewhere safe and I can still continue, I guess, tomorrow. But anyway, we're here in IAM now, and we're here for what reason? Why are we here? Do you remember? We're here because we want to give our EC2 instance access to CodeArtifact. How we're going to do that is by setting up two things. Okay, we learned about this in the last project, but two things that we need to set up is one, an IAM policy, and then two, an IAM role. An IAM policy is the rule that says whoever is granted this rule is now going to have access to CodeArtifact. And then the role is more about putting that role into like a vest or like some sort of thing that your EC2 instance can wear. Okay, so there's a separation in AWS between rules and things that people can like wear and take on to like have permissions to things. You know, I kind of think about it as this way, like policies are like privileges, and then like roles are like these like crowns or badges that you can wear to show that you have a certain privilege to something. So if we were to do this in terms of like, let's say, you know, a certain kind of crown, like if you wear that crown, you suddenly have access to the super secret room in the back of this castle. The policy is like the privilege to even go to that back office, that back secret room. And then the role is the crown that you're gonna wear to show that you actually have the permission to do it. So let's set up the policy in the first place. And to do that, we go into policies in the left-hand navigation panel, select policies, and then we're gonna create that policy. All right, I have a feeling that the policy is already created in my account. Just a small side note here. So if it's already created, I just need to make sure I delete it. Okay, so I'm starting from scratch with everyone. Yeah, because I'm in, I think this is created from that test run I did right before today's live. So sorry guys. Let me just quickly delete that policy so that I can start fresh with everyone and create this policy from scratch with you. All right, so once you're creating your policy, we're gonna be defining the policy in JSON today. So this is gonna be the code that says give this thing access to CodeArtifact. So we're just gonna click next, set up that policy, set up that privilege. Okay, and give it a name and description so we can identify it later. Oh, I love this question. Oh my gosh. H, I had this question when I first ran policies too. H's question says, is the policy's version a random date or does it need to be 2012, 1017? So true. It actually needs to be that certain date. It has to be 2012, 1017, because if you were to Google AWS IAM version dates, I think it should say here. It should be mentioned in the documentation. So it only supports 2 values for version number. Either this one that I use, which is the most modern version of IAM policies, or their older version, 2008. This 2008 version of policy writing. It's crazy to me that AWS didn't really need to answer their policy, update their policy language style since 2012, which is 13 years ago. But if we ever need to update it, I wonder what's going to happen to the policies that already exist. You know, maybe we need to start writing new policies and the version number is like 2026 dash something else. But that will only happen on the day that AWS publishes a new version of IAM policies. Okay, so we've got our policy name now and our policy description all set up. And we can just go and create the policy. Off we go. Okay, so we've created the privilege now. You know, the privilege to access CodeArtifact now exists somewhere. And the crown that your EC2 instance needs to wear is what we're gonna set up next. That crown is in the roles page. So imagine if every single role that you see in this list is a crown. Which one is your EC2 instance gonna wear? We need to create a new one from scratch so that that new crown is gonna take on the policy that we've just set up. Again, I think I might have created the role right before this live. So I would love to just quickly delete that role that I've set up so that I can do this from scratch with everyone today. All right, so let us select create role like this. And let me select use case EC2 because it's an EC2 instance that needs access. And then we're gonna jump straight into the next page so that we can add the policy that we created. So here we are creating a crown and we're saying, what can this crown grant? This crown can grant the permission to visit CodeArtifact. And that permission was defined in the policy that we just wrote. So let's use this, click that, click next, and finish setting up your role. That's it. So good. Okay, so your role will have the name ec2-instance-network-cicd, and off we go to create it. Okay, so we've created the crown now. Our EC2 instance can wear this handy little crown, and once it wears it, it can have access to CodeArtifact. So to finish off the security step, we're going to go back into our EC2 instance. We're going to select Actions, Security, and modify IAM role so that now it can wear that crown. I'm going to refresh this. Maybe it needs a bit of a refresh. Oh, did I get to create it? Okay, I did. All right, so I've created the role. It's living here somewhere. And now I just need to make sure that my EC2 instance can wear it. Are you going to come up? Let's see if I can refresh it here. So right now, I can't seem to find the role that I created. So like this crown was just lost somewhere. But let's see what happens if I were to just refresh and try again. Security, modify IAM role. Huh, funny. Oh, I just have to scroll down. Those are actually right here. Why? Oh, that was so funny. No, but okay, back me up. This literally looked like the entire list. Surely. Or could you tell that you could scroll down? Oh my gosh. So we scroll down now. And then here is the IAM role. Let's click on it. And let's update our IAM role. Very nice. So now our EC2 instance is wearing the crown. It now has access to CodeArtifact because it's wearing the crown. Ah! So now that it's wearing the crown, does that mean we can just do that? We can, cheeky connect EC2 and CodeArtifact? Yeah, and actually, yeah, that's it. All right, that's all we got to do now. So run that command that you can see in CodeArtifact here that says, let's set up a connection between your EC2 instance and your CodeArtifact repository. Enter that, and great. Okay, we've kind of run this command now that has basically given your EC2 instance a password that lets it unlock our CodeArtifact repository. So what's next for us is to finish off the connection steps, which are in steps 4, 5, and 6. Okay, in our previous project, so project 3 of the series, how we did that is by creating a new file called settings.xml here. Okay, and then what we did here was we actually copied all of the code that's in here into settings.xml here. Okay, so to copy all of that code, you need to write a parent tag like this. So settings opening tag, and then closing tag for settings. And this basically just gives our settings, it kind of like, it's like a folder of like settings that can now sit in between these tags. I would like to just quickly mention, if you'd like a refresher on what is settings.xml, settings.xml is basically a file that Maven is going to use to figure out how to connect to CodeArtifact. Right now, Maven has like great intentions. Maven just wants to know how it can help you with grabbing all of the packages you need to run your web app. So what you're writing in your settings.xml file is the directions for Maven. You're basically telling Maven, oh, okay, I know you want to help me with storing my packages or retrieving the packages. Let me tell you where these packages, where the repository is. So here's the address of my repository. Let me tell you when you should visit the repository, which is like whenever you need a package. We actually need to write out that instruction. And then the last one is an optional one. So the last one is step 6. And it's like setting up a mirror, which is a setting you can use to tell Maven, please do not go to like any backup repository if you can't find a certain package here. Always use the repository that I'm giving you. We actually don't need to run that step 6 command, but it is something that is just good as like, it is just a good practice to just add a mirror section and just say, if there's no other repository, like don't go out and find another repository to find a package, just always stay inside this repository that I give you. So first, again, let's tell Maven this is where the repository is, and here's the password for getting access to it. Next one, this is when you should talk to your CodeArtifact repository. So every time I need a package, that's our use case. Every time I need a package, go and visit my CodeArtifact repository and grab the packages there. And then that last one is like, don't go anywhere else. Stay inside this CodeArtifact repository. That should be your go-to place at all times for retrieving packages. That's all we're saying in the settings.xml file. So once you've copied everything over, your next step is to verify that this connection is now going to work. To do that, you just have to run this command in your local terminal. And what this does is it compiles your code. So what Maven needs to do when you're compiling code, notice how this command says compile, is that Maven needs to now go and actually turn your entire web app's code into code that a machine can run. This is crazy stuff, honestly, but it actually blows my mind that Maven, a software that's in your environment, can just do that. But what Maven is doing right now is it's going through your code and it's identifying all the packages and all the dependencies you need, and it's downloading them right now. Can you see like all of this getting downloaded? Who would have thought that your web app, as simple as it is, still has all of these dependencies that it relies on? And now every time it downloads, what's happening in the background is Maven is downloading the package, and it's gonna say, oh right, your CodeArtifact repository, super empty, okay? CodeArtifact was not helpful at all today, right now, because it doesn't have any of the packages that Maven needed. So Maven's gonna say, all right, CodeArtifact, you're being useless right now, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna paste a copy of all the packages I had to install by myself. I'm gonna put it in this repository, so that next time I need a package, I can at least have the copies that I just put in here. Shall we see those packages? I know it looks empty right now, but Maven has actually been filling it up in the background. So what you gotta do is press that refresh button, and ta-da! Look at all of these packages that Maven has actually been pasting or like storing a copy of in your CodeArtifact repository. So that was happening with every single downloading. Do you see all these downloading lines and then a downloaded line? Every single time I had to do a downloading line, it was basically installing like the package, and then it would have been storing like another copy in here as well. So thank you so much, Maven. You know, storing this copy means that the next time you build your web app, it's going to be so much faster. Do you want to see it? We did this last time. It was a lot of fun. But notice the difference that it's going to make now that these packages are in CodeArtifact. First time we compiled, look at this. We got 52 seconds. It took that long. It took that long for Maven to compile. Let's compile again, but this time with all of the packages already inside CodeArtifact. Done. 1 second. We went from 54 seconds down to 1 second to compile our web app, and that's the difference that having our packages in a repository, that's the difference that it makes. Ooh, we got some cool questions here. Thanks for the awesome questions. I love them. So we got Tintimal AI Studio saying, we need to push this code for the new file setting to go into our GitHub. Yes, that's correct. Tintimal AI Studio, you might notice that when you opened your GitHub repository, it's not there. You know, the settings.xml file, I know we just wrote it from scratch again today, but you know, it wasn't in our repository when we started the project. If you were to look at your file tree, every other file was there. We've got, okay, this is what it looks like. We've got src main web app, check, src main web app. We've got readme.md, check. Okay, readme.md is right here. And then we've even got pom.xml, okay, set up in here. So where's settings.xml? It's nowhere to be seen. But yeah, that's exactly why it's nowhere to be seen. Because in the last project, we didn't push the code into our GitHub repository. That's why we need to do it now. This time, we're not going to forget. Thank you so much for the great question here, 2H. Is Maven connected to Maven Central and then store them on CodeArtifact, or is CodeArtifact handling everything? I appreciate this question so much, H. I really like your questions. Like, these are great questions. So what is happening here is that CodeArtifact is simply the storage system. Okay, so by default, CodeArtifact doesn't go and retrieve packages for you. It stores them for you. But there is an upstream repository that's connected to CodeArtifact so that if Maven can't find what it needs, Maven automatically knows where to go next to find what it needs. So when we set up that upstream repository, what was happening was, you went to CodeArtifact, it wasn't there, so Maven went into the upstream one automatically, and then Maven would have had to still save a copy inside your CodeArtifact repository before pulling it back into your environment. So that's the flow. You can think of Maven as like the actual person actioning things, and then CodeArtifact is like this storage bucket. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if any other questions about that. It's actually quite simple. It's actually quite similar to, when we were cloning code on Git. Like if at the start of this project, when we cloned the code on Git, in some ways, technically, it's not our GitHub repository that's copying itself. It's actually our computer that still had to copy the code for us. It's our terminal that's running that command and copying the code for us and doing like the compute power of pulling the code into your local repository. It's simply that your GitHub repository is the storage for that code. Like it's just this little bucket that's like storing the code for you. So in that same way, CodeArtifact isn't the one that's actually downloading the packages. It's actually still Maven that's doing the downloading, and then CodeArtifact being the repository for storage. So yeah, I think that sets us up for today's project very, very well. I know that was an insane setup step, but that's also because the setup for CodeArtifact is something to be very careful about because it can incur a lot of errors. We've seen students run into errors here before. Now, CodeBuild is going to come through now, and don't be alarmed. I know it took us about 1 hour to do the setup today, but that's also because once you do the setup well, CodeBuild is going to be lightning fast. So what we've done so far is we have set up everything that we need in this half of the project so that this other half in this project is going to be very, very smooth sailing for us. Okay. So we've got all our repositories and CodeArtifact. We're now ready for CodeBuild. And we're going to be doing things step by step together. Instead of going straight into launching everything here, we're just going to do this one first. In this step, we're going to create a CodeBuild project. So we will set up a CodeBuild project, which will help us with automating the build process for our web app. Okay, so let's select done, and let's go into creating our CodeBuild project. Woohoo, exciting! We're in new service season, or like we're in new service land, because we're gonna move away from CodeArtifact. We're gonna close it up, and we're gonna open up the next thing, CodeBuild. Yeah, it's so cool. I actually really like how they're all in the same navigation panel. So we have CodeArtifact yesterday, CodeBuild today, Code Deploy tomorrow, and Code Pipeline in the last day of the series. So nice. So in CodeBuild, we're going to select build projects like this. Okay. And let's learn a little bit more about CodeBuild together. You might also find CodeBuild by searching CodeBuild, by the way, from the top here, and then clicking into CodeBuild like this. That's also another way for you to access CodeBuild. So CodeBuild, what it does is it helps you build and test code with elastic scaling, pay only for the build time you use. It's a fully managed continuous integration service that compiles source code, runs tests, and produces software packages that are ready to deploy. Yeah, that's actually a really good summary, but I also noticed that it's a little bit of a technical summary of what CodeBuild does. So if I were to just put all of this into simple words for us today, think of CodeBuild as a tool that compresses all of your web app's code into a single file. It's kind of like how you can compress a whole folder into a zip file. But for code, you need to do it in a very special way, okay? Because when you compress your web app, you can't just compress the web app code and use a zip file and just compress it and then like go deploy. No, that's not how it works. When you want to compress a web app, you compress the code plus all of the packages and dependencies that your web app needs. So that adds a bit of complexity. That's the reason why you can't just select your files and compress it into a zip file and say you're done. And that's the reason why CodeBuild exists. CodeBuild is a process that helps you with automating the whole process of getting all of the packages your web app needs from like CodeArtifact, and then putting all of the code, all of the dependencies and your source code in one place, and then compressing everything down into one file so that you can deploy it later. And yeah, that's the continuous integration service as you know it in a nutshell. CodeBuild also lets you test code. Building is that process of compressing. Testing is something different, and CodeBuild actually lets you do both. We are actually only going to be focusing on the build side today, because testing is a bit more of a cherry on top, okay, if we were to just look at the bare bones of a CI/CD pipeline. But if you really want to know more about testing, we're going to do that in our secret mission today. Cool? So let's take a screenshot of CodeBuild's homepage, and let's put that into our documentation. Is that a good screenshot? Nah, I think that wasn't a good screenshot. I kind of like it when my screenshot is like, shows a little bit more, than the header. Kind of like this better. So I'm just gonna put that in there. Cool, so cool. I actually quite like this homepage. I really like how you can already see there's this thing called buildspec.yml, which is exactly the file that we need to use in just a second. How fun. I really like this homepage. All right, very nice. Okay. So let's get into explaining what CodeBuild does. CodeBuild is a continuous integration, which means it's a CI service. And a CI service which it means it helps you to compile code, i.e. Compile and package code, which means you turn your web app code into something computers can run, then compress it all into a neat little package. Engineering teams use it because CI services automate's the keyword here, automate this process for us. If CI doesn't exist, so if continuous integration doesn't exist, engineers would have to manually compile and package code themselves before they deploy it. Okay, all good. Really cool. And just as a little note, it looks like TimTim AI Studio already saved the code, the settings.xml file from yesterday. So that's awesome. That's super cool, impressive. And H has asked a really, really good question again. Love this one too. H has asked, is that a different build than the one Maven would do? So CodeBuild, as you might have noticed, is building your code, and Maven, when we run compile, is also compiling our code and building the code. The cool difference between them is that CodeBuild does a little bit more. So it runs the same command as what we would do locally. So locally, we ran that command to compile our code, and that's the reason why CodeArtifact repositories could go all the way into our CodeArtifact repository started storing those packages, is because we ran a code for compiling. Let me just show you as a reminder. We ran this line, and that's like compiling the code. But that's not fully building it, because in a production environment, you actually still need to package the code. You need to put what you've compiled into a package, and that package needs to live somewhere. And in our case, we aren't really packaging it yet. We're just simply compiling it, which is not the full building kind of process compared to what CodeBuild's gonna do. Because CodeBuild is gonna do this, and it's gonna do more. It's gonna do this, and afterwards, package it into one single file for the next step. I hope that's clear. Let me know if I could explain that even better or even further. All right, so we're here to create a CodeBuild project today. So select Build Projects, and let's create a project now. I was doing a fun little test just now. Aw, damn, let me delete that now. I was doing a fun little test that we might see just in a second in our secret mission. I feel like I spoiled it. That's okay. But in our build projects, we're going to create a new project now. And let us name our project Nextwork-DevOps-CICD, classic name that we've been reusing throughout this entire series. Under project type, let's just keep with the default project, and the default project just basically means it's your standard type that lets AWS run everything for you, like we're creating this entire CI, like continuous integration, here in CodeBuild. If you wanted to do a runner project is more like if you already have continuous integration set up somewhere else, and you just want CodeBuild to do a bit of the running of that process, of being like the engine to run a continuous integration process set up somewhere else. But we're gonna set up everything in CodeBuild today. So we're gonna do a default project, and then we're gonna pick a source. Can you tell what source means? I'm actually very curious. I would love to know, if you were to look at this here, can you tell what source indicates? Okay, so give yourself a second to just have a look here. What is a source for a build? Can you guess what might come up? I wonder. Okay, so I'm gonna, I don't know, should I wait another second? All right, so I'm gonna mention now, what is a source? A source for build is where your code lives. So if I were to expand all these source options, now you know. Source means, is your code living in GitHub? Is your code in Bitbucket and GitLab and Amazon S3 and code commit? Where's your code? And we're like, code's in GitHub. The code's in GitHub. Okay, cool. So we're gonna tell our source that our code's in GitHub. And we're gonna connect AWS to GitHub. Okay, you might see that I'm looking like real disappointed in myself right now. And the only reason for that is because I now have to, I'm not gonna do a cheeky undo of some settings. I really should have done this project in the other region today. I really should have started this project by checking my region, but I always make that mistake. So this is something that I'm not supposed to have yet, so let me delete that now. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so this is what your setup might look like. Let me try that one more time. So this is what your setup might look like. You pick a source and you say GitHub. Okay, this is what it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to, you're gonna see that CodeBuild's like, okay, I get it. Your code's in GitHub, but by the way, we don't have a connection to GitHub. Even if your code's in GitHub, I have no way of grabbing it. How am I supposed to connect to GitHub and grab your code? So this is a classic situation when you're wanting to use continuous integration tools. Because continuous integration is literally about every time you make changes to your code, you're automatically compiling it and making that file. So common continuous integration problem is making sure that your tool, in our case, CodeBuild, actually has access to the code that it's supposed to compile. In our case, the code in GitHub. So we're gonna be solving like a very common continuous integration problem today by connecting GitHub with AWS. Now, this is where a lot of students have gotten stuck in the past. So if you are feeling a little lost or stuck, please let me know and we can always slow down even more. So here, it says that we haven't connected to GitHub. And so we're gonna click Manage Account Credentials here. All right, so actually I think you can just fully click into it. Yeah, just gonna open it up in a new tab for you. So here we're gonna tell AWS, oh yeah, you're right. We haven't set up a connection between AWS and GitHub before. So how we're going to connect is we're going to log into GitHub using an AWS Managed GitHub app. All right, I'm gonna answer that in just a second. Oh my gosh, I just realized I skipped like 2 questions because I got so into this. Classic NAD style, but that's okay. So GitHub app is like the simplest and most secure way for you to connect to GitHub. AWS simply asks you to just log in to GitHub as you usually would, and AWS handles all of the credential settings behind the scenes. You might remember something called a personal access token from project 2 of the series, and that's when we had to literally generate this long ass string that represents our credentials for GitHub, and then we have to copy and paste that string somewhere else. Now, personal access tokens are not the most secure thing because if anyone has access to it, they technically have access to your GitHub repository. So you kind of want to remove yourself from that entire process if you can. And in our case, we're going to remove ourselves by saying, hey, AWS, I don't even want to see my credential string. I don't want to touch it, copy it, paste it. Can you do all of that for me? And that's basically why the GitHub app option exists. OAuth is the advanced option for GitHub app. It basically gives you more control around the setting up of this connection. And it's a bit intense. You would only do this, you would only use OAuth if you have an existing OAuth kind of system set up and you want to make sure all the connections to GitHub are managed by the same app. But in our case, we're simple. We're just going to go for GitHub app here. And then we can go ahead to create the GitHub connection. Now, I know I skipped over a few questions there, so let's answer those together and then keep on going. Now, there are multiple credential types for GitHub, like GitHub app, personal access tokens, and what was the last one? An OAuth app. We use GitHub app because it's the most simple, yet also the most secure way between GitHub and AWS. AWS handles all of the credentials, e.g. the tokens, in the background for us. We simply need to log in once to GitHub using a special AWS managed GitHub app. And that's why it's called the GitHub app credential type. Okay, so all done. And I'm going to quickly backtrack us over to the questions we skipped previously. So we've got this one that says, my CodeBuild project's source configuration means where the code lives. Oh yeah, we answered that so well. I didn't even need to say anything else. Where the code lives. And we selected GitHub. That's our web apps source code repository. All right, and as you might have expected, in this step, we are setting up a connection between GitHub and AWS. And the one thing I didn't mention yet is that connection is set up with another service called Code Connection. You see how we have this whole code suite of tools? CodeArtifact, CodeBuild. There's also Code Deploy, Code Pipeline later on, and Code Connection is this helper service that helps with the connections between your AWS environment and external platforms like GitHub. So we're getting to know Code Connection in this step as well. Okay, so let's choose GitHub app, and for connection, you're going to notice we have no results. We haven't created a connection with Code Connection before. So we have to actually click here to create a new GitHub connection and open a new page. So now we're in Code Connection now. And Code Connection says, all right, welcome. I'm going to quickly set you up and send you back into CodeBuild so that you can connect CodeBuild to AWS. But first of all, I just need to connect you with GitHub. To do that, you actually give your connection a special name. And our name is going to be our default nextwork-devops-cicd, and let's connect to GitHub here. Okay, it's going to be fun. Literally all you got to do here is log into GitHub over this special AWS app. And since I've already logged into GitHub in a separate tab, AWS is making it even easier for us. No need to type in any username or password. Just tell GitHub which account you'd like to sign in as. And this is my Nextwork profile where I stored the web app code. So I'm going to be selecting this one. Okay. And just like that, connection is set up. So that's the power of Code Connection. Its ability is really about being able to connect your environment with all of these separate services. Okay, so just like that, you can literally click your GitHub profile name like this and finish the connection to GitHub. Okay, so now that you've finished the connection to GitHub, you can tell CodeBuild, aha, this is the connection that I'm going to use. Nextweek-DevOps-CI/CD was the name of that connection we set up in Code Connection. So we're going to tell CodeBuild that this is my default GitHub account that I want to be connected to. Okay, so connection should be set up now. If you were to refresh, you should see that it's now available. This connection is alive and thriving. Good. So now that you go back into your source panel, you should see that it's now a success. You've successfully connected to GitHub, and you can even pick the exact repository that you're using. What was our repository? That was this one, Nextweek Web Project. That's the name of the repository that contains our code. Okay, this one. So here, we're pretty much done. Honestly, pretty much done. So you just need to make sure that this default setting that rebuilds every time a code change is pushed is staying selected. And then we also pick single build here. Oops. Okay, sorry about that, team. As you can see, I'm just floundering around in the guide and realizing that I explained too much without scrolling, and now I'm finding my place. Okay, cool. I think I found my place. All right, I really need to follow my own project guide sometimes. I get so taken away with how fun it is to do this live. But yes, the project guide also suggests that you can take a screenshot of your successful connection before you move on, which is a great idea. So let's do that. Let's take a screenshot of this successful connection in the source panel. And put that in our project guide like this. And then select next and talk about code connection before we move on. The service that helped connect our AWS environment with GitHub is AWS Code Connections. Code Connections also lets us connect our environment with other third-party platforms. In this case, it makes sure that we have a secure connection to GitHub so that our CodeBuild project can use our GitHub repository as the source with permission. Okay, so we've connected now to our GitHub repository, and now is the perfect time to continue with finishing the setup for CodeBuild. Now, in the finishing up of this setup, we're going to be introducing you to another service. Oh, I know, it's like service mania in this project, but another service called S3, because S3 needs to be a bucket that stores our build artifacts. And you know how I kept saying throughout this demo, CodeBuild needs to compress everything and turn it into one file. That one file needs to be stored somewhere. And S3 is going to be the storage bucket that actually stores that file for us. And that's why we need S3 today. In this step, we will finish up our CodeBuild project's setup. We'll also need to set up an S3 bucket. That's going to be the storage location of the build artifacts we create in the build process. Okay? A build artifact is the compressed file, is the compressed file that represents our web app? I would say a build artifact for this project is the compressed file for our web app so that we can deploy it later. Okay, very, very nice. So let's keep on going and finish up the setup for our CodeBuild project. Okay, our environment is going to be on demand, and on demand basically means that AWS will create the resources for your build only when you start it, and they will actually just tear down this environment when it's done. Now, what we're going to learn here is that CodeBuild actually spins up its own environment in the background in order to process and compress your file. It doesn't quite do all of that in your existing EC2 instance. It actually, in the background, spins up its own EC2 instance, and the entire EC2 instance's purpose is to compress your files. And that's the reason why CodeBuild really needs access to your source code and a GitHub repository. It didn't ask to connect to your EC2 instance with all of the files locally. It didn't ask that because your EC2 instance is actually going to need, this new EC2 instance is going to need to grab the code directly from GitHub instead of connecting to like another EC2 instance, which is a more complicated process. So CodeBuild in the background is secretly spinning up this new EC2 instance to grab the code from GitHub, compress it, and then store that compressed file into S3. So here in this environment panel, you're basically being asked, what do you want that CodeBuild EC2 instance, that secret EC2 instance, how should we set it up? Should we just only spin up a new instance when you need to compress something? And here we're saying yes, let's only create that EC2 instance, that secret one, when we need it on demand. We do not need to just open and just keep running a random EC2 instance in the background because we're not building things that often. If we had huge projects and building is happening like all the time, then we would use reserve capacity, but we don't need that. Okay, we only need EC2 instances on demand. And then here the environment image is like, do you want to use an AMI? And we're like, yes, like let's use an AMI here. And then for the compute type, we're just going to make sure that we choose EC2. I just realized we have a new setting that popped up. I'm kind of shocked here because I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this. I don't think I've seen running mode before. So I'm going to make sure that that's in the project guide as well. Is it in the project guide? I have a feeling this is new to us. So let me add that to the project guide right after this. But here it says running mode. We have either running on a Docker container or running on the EC2 instance directly. I have a feeling this isn't going to affect us too much, but let's just run on the EC2 instance directly. And let's just say that the operating system for that secret EC2 instance should again be Linux, and the runtime, oh, maybe it is a container. Interesting. The runtime is standard. Very nice. And then for this to be Corretto 8. Okay, I've understood this new setting now. So here it is asking us how we actually want to run this EC2 instance, and if we want the processes to be run on a Docker container. And here we actually want to make sure that our Docker container is using Amazon Linux Corretto 8. I hope this is familiar to you. Do you remember when was the last time we heard the words Corretto 8? We actually mentioned it somewhere in this project today. And that was when we installed Java. When we installed Java, the version of Java we installed was Corretto 8. So we want to make sure that whatever EC2 instance we spin up, whatever environment we spin up, is designed to compress files or a web app that was written in Corretto 8. So now that we have that set up, we are also going to create a CodeBuild service role automatically, and this service role is basically going to give CodeBuild the permission to do the things it needs to do to compress your file. We're going to go into this into a bit more detail later, but it's not important for now. Okay, and just like that, we're going to pause here for a second and recap what we've just done in this question here. our CodeBuild project's environment configuration means the environment setup for the compute power, i.e. the EC2 instance, that will be compressing the files, that will be compiling and compressing the files when we run our CodeBuild project. It includes settings like provisioning model. What else did we see? Compute, operating system, and the image and service role. Wow, so many settings. These settings determine how a new EC2 instance will be spun up and conduct the build process. It's important here that the EC2 instance has the correct permissions to everything it needs to work properly. Okay, dun dun dun. We haven't really talked about permissions yet, but now that you see that we're actually creating a new service role, expect some permissions work to happen in a second. Okay, so as we finish setting up our CodeBuild project, we also have something called a build spec file. And a build spec file is basically a file that tells your EC2 instance how to, or actually it tells that secret new instance that gets spun up, how to actually compress the files. Just like how we needed settings.xml to tell Maven how to use CodeArtifact, you actually need a buildspec.yml file to do the same thing, give the instructions to CodeBuild. So CodeBuild is actually going to be opening and reading your build spec file to understand how to actually find the code to compress, how to compress it, how to turn it into like a single package, and how to store that package in S3. CodeBuild needs those instructions. You're like giving directions with this file. So we're going to select use a build spec file because we're going to write all of these commands in a separate place, and then we can move on with our setup. Okay, we're going to skip this here, by the way. So if you're a little expert and you want to know what's going on here, batch configuration is like running multiple builds at the same time. We don't need to do that. So we're just going to skip that. And then we have artifacts. Okay, so now we're up to like just the last few bits of CodeBuild. We're almost done with setting up CodeBuild. We have two more things that are kind of important, so we're just going to talk about it for a few seconds here. Artifacts is about where you're going to store the package that you create, that single compressed file. And you've got Amazon S3 as an option here. So here, once you select Amazon S3, CodeBuild says, cool, like store the artifact in S3. CodeBuild, like me, I will make sure to store all of the files in the bucket that you tell me. Then you're going to say, okay, which bucket? CodeBuild's not going to ask you, which bucket are you going to be using? Unfortunately, we haven't actually set up that bucket yet. So we're going to need to go to S3, just quickly create a bucket, and then assign it here. Okay, so one thing in our to-do list is to just create that bucket and put that here. And then afterwards, we're almost done. We just have logs to set up, and logs are about monitoring. Monitoring the progress of your builds, making sure that you can track what happens. But for now, let's clear off that task here about bucket name, and let's set up the bucket. Cool, are we ready? I hope you're feeling ready about this. The S3 bucket is like a 3-minute thing to set up. All you gotta do is search S3 here, select and right-click on S3, open that in a new tab, and let's create an S3 bucket. Okay, and then we're going to create our bucket, create a new one like this, and you're going to enter a bucket name, and there's going to be an error coming soon. Can you tell what the error could be? I'm not going to say what it is. I'm just going to create a bucket straight away. It's like creating like a Google Drive folder. Like a S3 bucket is simply just a place for storage. And here's the little error. Bucket names need to be completely unique. Okay, no two buckets in the entire world can share the same name. So if you were to do something generic like this, it's probably going to say that bucket name exists somewhere. So just add your name to the back of it, and let's try creating it again. Okay, so we've got our bucket sorted, and all we got to do is add that bucket to our CodeBuild setup. So what you're going to do is we're going to answer this question, and then we're going to continue with our CodeBuild setup. Okay, so build artifacts are files or resources that get created as a part of the CodeBuild build process. They're important because they represent artifacts that need to be used later on in the CI/CD pipeline. For example, our build process will create a compressed file that represents our web app. And we'll need to use that compressed file to deploy the web app later on. Okay, so to store our build artifacts, we created an S3 bucket to store them. Thanks so much. So I think that's a nice summary of why we're creating this S3 bucket and why build artifacts are important. And let's just hit done. Okay, and this is the part where you might hate me for a little second, but this is out of love. When you open your bucket name, you might notice that if you try to search your bucket name, okay, so the bucket name was nextwork-devops-cicd-natasha. If you try to search it, you're like, oh, where's my bucket? Okay, so sometimes they don't sync like this, like super quickly. You might need to refresh. Okay, you might need to refresh your service so it loads the latest buckets that you have in your account. What does that mean for us? It means we actually need to refresh this tab and just do our setup one more time. But I promise you, I'll race you to the finish. It takes like 1 minute when you refresh and do it again. You're gonna be surprised. So don't be sad. We're just gonna reload and we're gonna do this CodeBuild setup so that now we can actually load in our S3 bucket's name. Otherwise, our CodeBuild project we started creating this CodeBuild project before we created the bucket, so by default, it can't actually recognize something that gets created after itself. And now that we've refreshed it, we're gonna now create a CodeBuild project that does know about this S3 bucket that lives somewhere. At least we've already done so much of the setup that there's nothing too much more to add other than click, click, click into our existing build project. So let's click into repository. Don't forget, you've already created that connection to GitHub, so you don't need to redo that part. So you've got the repository down. You've got the webhook events. We kept the default settings for this one. Environment settings, we actually just kept all of these default settings here and just made sure it was Amazon Corretto 8. That was the image. Okay, make sure this says Corretto 8. And for the service role, let's create a new service role. And we're gonna use a build spec file. I hope you remember that. So the build spec file just tells CodeBuild how to build the project. And artifacts, S3 bucket. And the bucket name that you set up, okay? So we've just started from the top, but just like that, in 1 minute, we've set up our project now. Cool. And now that that's done, you can also enter a name here that basically defines the name of the file that gets created. And that's it. That's all we had to do for to connect our bucket. And we're gonna make sure that our artifacts are just packaged into one handy zip file here. Okay, so it's a very small detail to make sure that the artifact files are in a zip compressed file, but this really helps make sure that anything that we create is in a tidy package within our S3 bucket, so there aren't too many files to go through to see what our CodeBuild process has created. Okay, so let's just put it inside a zip, and let's answer this question. When setting up CodeBuild, we also chose to package artifacts into a zip file. This helps with package management, as files are all organized neatly in a single executable file. Executable just means that it can be deployed by itself. So it's a bit of a technical term, but I thought I'd throw it in for any of the experts that want to know about it. And yeah, some other benefits of using a zip file. We've talked about organization, but also it also helps with compressing the size. Okay. Great. And I love this question from H. So is buildspec the equivalent to GitHub Actions workflows? I would say GitHub Actions workflows has an element to it, but GitHub Actions workflows I think covers a bit more than just the build process. If I'm not wrong, GitHub Actions workflows is actually closer towards code pipeline later in this series. But I personally am still a little bit new to GitHub Actions myself, so I will need to figure out whether or not GitHub Actions can help you automate more than just the build process. If it's just the build process, then maybe it is like an equivalent, but if GitHub Actions can do more than just the building process, then it's definitely way more than a build spec file. Okay, so we're gonna finish up with our CloudWatch logs here, and all we gotta do here is just make sure that CloudWatch logs stays ticked. And CloudWatch logs is basically a recorder that will just say everything that goes wrong or everything that goes right. I will make a record of it so that we can save, our history somewhere else. And CloudWatch logs are actually very, very helpful for troubleshooting because they just note down any commands that are run, they note down any errors that occur, and if something goes wrong, you can easily go to CloudWatch logs and see exactly what went wrong in the process. So we're gonna give our CloudWatch log group, which is basically our folder of logs, a handy name. And then that's it. And I think that means that we can go straight into creating the build project. Cool. I totally get that this was a bit of a lengthy process for setting up CodeBuild, but once you know it, just like what you saw me do in a second ago, it takes about 1 second to it takes about 1 minute to redo it if you're familiar with CodeBuild. And really, in a CI/CD pipeline, you just set it up once, and then it just starts automating builds for you time and time again. So a very, very worthwhile setup to do, knowing how much it can automate for you down the line. Okay, but let's get into it. So for monitoring, we enabled CloudWatch logs, which it's a service that will note down commands that are run and any errors that happen. This is so helpful for troubleshooting. Okay, great. So shall we give it a go? Let's click on Create Build Projects. And let's give it a go. I think this isn't clicking for me yet, which could be because of a service row issue. My hunch says maybe my service role name is taken. Oh yeah. So it says my service role name already exists, which is a unique error that I have here because it's something that I should have, yet again, something I should have deleted before I started this project. This is a role that you are supposed to create fresh, and I created it when I set up a test project. Okay, let us just try doing that one more time. Create the build project. Okay. I think I'm just going to have to do a cheeky refresh and just set this up again because I have that unique error with my service role name. You're not going to get this, so I think your creation is going to be successful. I'm just going to be quickly just create the build project one more time. And now that you've done it, this is our third time doing it together. Maybe you know it off by heart. Default project, GitHub, your repository. Okay, webhook, we keep the default settings. Environment, we keep everything except for Corretto 8. It's going to be the image we use. And then we're going to use that new service role. Build spec, we're using a build spec file today. And for artifacts, it's our S3 bucket. So let's pick our S3 bucket. And the name of the compressed file is going to be, the name of the compressed file is going to say, next to DevOps CI/CD artifact, plus making sure that our artifacts packaging is a zip file, and finally our log name. Oh, I think I truly did that in 1 minute. Was that 1 minute? Super cool. Okay, so let's create the build project. It seems like my policy was created. Okay. Just to make things easier for us, it tells me that my policy already exists. So what that means is that there's also a policy that gets created by default in the background when you create your CodeBuild role. So if you see something like this on the day when you decide to redo this project, you might run into the same error as me. And all you have to do is just make sure that you're using a new policy name. But for myself, I just want to do everything super clean for us, so I'm going to delete what was existing. And should we try again? Okay. Oh, okay. Funny vibes. I can see that we've got an error here today that says webhook creation failed, access denied to the connection, troubleshooting guide. Okay, that's all good. So here we're just getting told here that our webhook connection, this thing here, we don't have permission to actually set up a webhook, which is fine. I think I'm actually going to update our project guide so that we don't select the webhook thing. We're just going to unselect it because we actually don't need it until code pipeline where it's more relevant. Task failed successfully. That's literally how I'm taking this one today, aren't I? So thanks so much for all the love. And honestly, yeah, I'm actually kind of glad we failed this because now I can talk about webhook in a bit more detail. But webhook basically just says if you have it set up, it means every time you commit your code and you push changes to your code, CodeBuild is automatically going to just compress whatever new thing you pushed. So if you don't have webhooks set up, you have to manually start the project each time. And that's actually super fine for us because it's a good thing for us to just manually build the project and see that process step by step in front of us. So that's okay. Let's leave this unticked and we'll get to see it automatically work later on in this project. And that's totally fine. And then in that case, we'll just leave the complexity of, the complexity of having a webhook for the next project, which is actually a really, really good thing for us. Okay, we've got our build in front of us now. And the moment we click start build, what we should expect is for the build, for CodeBuild to just compress our file. What else should it do? it should compile, so it should turn our file into something machines can run, and it should compress our file, and there's one more step that it should do. Do you remember what it could be? The one last step that it should do is it should store that file in S3. So a very classic way of testing whether or not CodeBuild was successful is to see whether or not that new file was created in your bucket. Because if CodeBuild was failing, then it wouldn't be able to create that file and store it in S3. So what we're going to be doing in this step is we're going to be actually testing CodeBuild and seeing whether or not we can store that file. Okay, so in this step, we will be running CodeBuild for the first time and seeing whether it can create a compressed file plus store it in S3. Heads up, everyone, we might just run into an error here. But we're gonna stay strong, team. Errors are great learnings, and I hope we get to take away something new from the error that we might just see later on. Let's just start the build now and see what happens. So we're gonna start the build. We're like, all right, CodeBuild, let's go. Let's create that file. Let's see what you can do. We've done that lengthy setup process to tell CodeBuild the environment settings, the S3 bucket, and CodeBuild is like, nah, I'm still gonna, I don't know what to do. I'm failing. So CodeBuild is failing. What do you do when you see something failed? Okay, this is actually an important skill when you're in cloud. Yeah, CodeBuild, be kind to us. This is so true. So what do you do when you see something's gone wrong? The last thing we're gonna do together is, panic. The first thing we're gonna do is try to figure out what went wrong. Very sadly, we can see that it seems like we don't have logs. Can we try to view the entire log? Do we have logs today? Cool. So we actually have some logs that we can see. And this is the power of CloudWatch. It actually just logs, because we set it up as a monitoring service, it logs what happens step by step when it tried to run the build process. And it actually tells us that we got an error. Failed to get access token from code connections, etc. Okay, so if we go to phase details, next up, download source, we have an error that says failed to get access token from code connections. What does that mean? How could we fail to get an access token? So what's happening here is that code connection is telling us that we don't have access to it. Spicy. Okay, it means that we actually need to tell CodeBuild that we should go give it access to code connection. Now the ironic thing here is that this project guide at the moment does not have the instructions for this. And that could be because of a different way that the project was set up when we wrote it, but it's totally okay. It's totally okay. What we can do is just do that live troubleshooting together, and let's see how we can solve this error live. All right, so phase details tells us that we've got a failed connection to get access tokens, and the first thing you need to do when you realize this is you try to figure out how does CodeBuild have permissions in the first place. What gives CodeBuild permissions to things? So you can go into, is it build details? You can go into where you can figure out where CodeBuild gets its permission to things. I wonder if it actually we actually need to go all the way to IAM to find it. Oh no, you can select CodeBuild and your build project that you set up and simply click on the role. This is the service role we set up, and the service role determines what CodeBuild has access to. So the error that we ran into said that we failed to get an access token from code connections. So what should we do next? I think we can give it access to code connections. That sounds like a handy next step. So let's here in our CodeBuild's role, give it the permission to access code connections. To do this, we can write code connection here and select that in the policy that comes up. Okay, so this is a policy that lets you get access to code connection, and you can even expand the policy name, and it tells you that it grants you the access to get a connection token. That's good news to us. So we're going to want to use this and select add permissions. We should have permissions now then to our code connection. And how you can double check this is by just making sure that the resource that your policy references matches up with the resource that caused the error. So go back to the error. It says, yo, you don't have access to code connection and this specific resource in code connection. Okay, so this is the specific resource we don't have connection to. Does it match up with what's in the policy we used? Aha, let's see. I have a feeling that it doesn't. Yeah, it might not. That actually makes a lot of sense now then, why it doesn't work. So as you can see here, for some reason, maybe this is a unique error that I'm running into, so maybe you won't run into the same error as me. This is going to be an interesting one to investigate later. But what I'm noticing here is that the policy that allows access to code connection is not referencing the same resource as the ARN that is causing the error today. The resource that's causing an error has the ARN that ends with like AFF7, but I think our policy doesn't grant access to any resource that ends with AFF7 today. So I think what I'm going to need to do is actually edit this policy to say, hey, I need access to the one that says AFF7. For anyone that's actually doing this project live with me right now, I would love to hear whether or not you're seeing the same error as me, so that we can troubleshoot this together. Yeah, let me know. And let's see whether or not we can solve it just by editing our policy. I'm quite interested. So here, I'm going to update this so that it says the correct ARN. And then I'm going to again do the same thing for the next one and just make sure that it references the correct ARN. I do have a feeling this might actually be a unique error for my account because because across this project I've deleted connections and then created new connections and then deleted things and then created new things, and sometimes that actually like confuses AWS when it comes to permissions, because it might say, okay, yeah, I'll connect you to this connection, and it accidentally connects you to the connection that you just deleted. So that could have been what happened. That's my theory. But I think to test the theory, we're just going to start the build one more time and see whether or not I'm running into any other errors. Yeah, H, exactly. Because of all the times we had to recreate it. And recreate like CodeBuild as well. Recreate the code connection, recreate the policies. Something could have gone wrong in the middle there. So I think I might be running into a unique error. I hope you're not seeing this, but if you are, it's okay. I've just showed you how you can troubleshoot it, so you can follow those instructions. And yeah, good news. I've just run the build one more time, and as you can see, I don't have that error anymore. You know, previously we had that like chunky error that's like failed to get an access token. That's not the error anymore. We got a new error, and this time the error actually matches up. This is our success state, because now we're at the correct error for the project guide. And in this case, the error says YAML file does not exist, which is such a confusing message to see if you're new to it. But YAML file actually references something in our build. When we said that we would use buildspec, this tells us that we are supposed to have a buildspec.yml file in the source code root directory. Do we have a buildspec file? CodeBuild is clearly now looking for one in our project's root directory. Do we have the file, guys? Let's go check our source code root directory by scrolling up and clicking on the link that takes us to our source code. This is pretty cool. Look at that. Our source code has this handy little link that takes us back to our GitHub project. And as you can see, there's no sign of buildspec here. We did not create it. So here's our next step. Let's set up buildspec and let's push that, push buildspec into our source code repository. Okay, so our first build failed because CodeBuild could not find the buildspec.yml file in our source code's root repository, or root directory. Okay, so you can actually just mention it here, like this. A buildspec.yml file is needed because it tells CodeBuild how to run the build process. All right, so let's solve this right away by creating that buildspec file now in our project. So we're gonna go back to our root repository, and we've got our settings file looking good, and we've got our buildspec next that we need to do. So let's set up buildspec.yml. Okay, so buildspec.yml, let's see what we can do here. We are going to just copy a piece of code that is provided already by the project guide and then set it up and configure it so it matches our project. That buildspec.yml file that we're going to copy in and paste in is a template that you can also find inspiration from in AWS documentation. But we've just decided to give you that template straight away so that we can get straight to editing that file. Now, just make sure you have your buildspec file, it's named correctly, and it's actually at the root directory of your project. Do not put it inside this folder. I don't want to hear that, oops, my buildspec file is inside the source folder. Like, this is not correct. You want to make sure that it's in the root repository. You can tell it's in the right place if you close all of these subfolders and you can still see buildspec here. That's how you know it's in the root. It's not hidden inside a subfolder. Okay? So once that's done, we're going to paste that template code that I mentioned for buildspec, and it just comes with a few lines of code. So here, you can just understand this is how buildspec works. One is a version number, so this is the version of a buildspec file, and buildspec is split into phases. So how you instruct CodeBuild is by telling CodeBuild that you have 4 phases to run. The install phase, so make sure you install the correct Java version, which is Corretto 8. The pre-build phase, which basically tells CodeBuild that you also need access to CodeArtifact. Okay, so this is the command for exporting that CodeArtifact auth token. So this is actually fun fact for anyone that's interested. This is the command that we read in CodeArtifact's connection instructions. That's step 3, connection instruction. We're automating the running of that instruction by putting it inside buildspec. So you've got the install phase, you've got the pre-build phase, so getting authorization or getting permissions phase, and then this is the actual build. Now we're gonna tell CodeBuild that you can compile. Do you see how, again, this is a familiar command? We ran this in the terminal before. Buildspec is all about just automating that process so you're not running it manually in the terminal all the time. And then there's the post-build phase. Now, can we turn what you've compiled into a package? So post-build is the packaging phase. Create that file. And then lastly, you have the artifact section, which says at the completion of all of these phases, all 4 phases, store that artifact that you create, that single file, into target, and target represents our S3 bucket. because we set up S3 bucket as the artifact storage. So it's going to go straight into here and it's going to create a file. So that's it. That's all the instructions we need to give CodeBuild. So I really love seeing this because it actually is just the automation of all the manual steps that we've run in the past. The automation of installing Java, the automation of getting access to CodeArtifact, the automation of compiling your code. And now here, a new thing, the automation of packaging what you compile so that you can store it in S3. So that's the magic of buildspec. It puts together things that we're actually familiar with and automates it. So let's just take a screenshot and write a little appreciation letter to buildspec by explaining what it does. Okay, so the first two phases in our buildspec.yml file installs Java and gets us access to CodeArtifact. The third phase in the buildspec file compiles the web app. The fourth phase in our buildspec file, what does it do? Packages the web app into a single compressed artifact. Okay, so all done. We've explained what buildspec does. It's really as simple as that. And now that it's done, make sure you edit buildspec. Remember how we're supposed to tailor it to our web app? There's one thing you need to do, and that's to make sure that that CodeArtifact command you paste in here is tailored to your domain. So you've got the network domain, that's the domain of the CodeArtifact repository. Domain owner references the account ID, your account ID. So I don't think your account ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think your account ID might be another number. So you actually need to go, head up here, copy in your account ID, boop, give it a cheeky copy, okay, and paste that in here. All done. So this now tells your buildspec file, and it tells CodeBuild where that artifact repository lives. It lives inside this account ID's account. Cool. So we can save that now and just save all the changes that we've made. And off we go with pushing that into GitHub. So let's create a new terminal. And let us actually add all the changes and also run this command for saving it and then pushing it. We learned about these commands in our GitHub project, and here we go again. All right, it tells us that we've got permission denied. Oh, I think this is something that I might have run into in the past. I'm surprised to see it again. 1 second, team. I think what we're seeing right now is a permissions an error related to pushing something into GitHub. Permission to network 1 is denied to me. Unable to access this. The requested URL returned an error because I don't have permission. I think what's happened here is for some reason, it says Natasha Ongla's coding is my username for my personal email, like my personal account, but network1 is the owner of that repository. So my network account is saying my personal account doesn't have access to push it. And I'm like, but when did I start using my personal account? That is a bit of a confusing thing to run into, I have to say. But I think we know how to resolve this. We just need to run a few commands, and then we're there, and then we're done. So let me try, just bring up, I think I wrote this in my notes once. There is a handy command for resolving this one. I just need to find the notes for it. And where did it go? Where did it go? Ooh, I think we might need to do a change in authentication. Ooh, I'm a little bit stumped because I didn't expect to see this error today. But I feel like to do this, we just need to run the commands for resetting our permissions to GitHub in the terminal. And there was a special command for it. Let me see. I'm just searching through my existing notes about GitHub. I think do I need to run? Maybe I actually need to run a command that will accept my username and password. There was a command for this, I think. There's a command that forces you to like enter your username and password in Git. I think it's called, oh, is it called git pull? Let me see this. I think there is something where you can just double check your remote origin. Okay, and that tells me my remote origin. And this is correct. Okay, we want to be connected to like this user's repo. And then the one I need to sort out is how I can authenticate as the other user instead of my personal account. I think there's one thing called git pull. Maybe git pull origin name. And I think you need to write -v at the end. And maybe it says I still don't have the access rights. So maybe it's actually about the credential store. I think it was called git config. Let's see, --global.credential helper.helper. Oh no, I think it was --global space credential .helper store. And this is a command that basically asks GitHub to store some credentials. I think, oh my gosh, I wonder what was the command for resetting your GitHub credentials. Maybe I think what I might need to do is to unset credentials so that if there are any default credentials currently stored, they get released, and then I get to enter new credentials afterwards. Could that work? I don't know if anyone else is running into the same issue here, but if you are, let me know, and then we can do this step by step together. But there is a command that I've saved in the past that's about unsetting credentials. So what this does is it lets go of any credentials that you might have. And it also, there's also a version of this command that releases any credentials that your terminal might store locally. So it's called system, like this. I think what I might need to do is to go back to running that git config global file one more time, and then trying to push again. Yeah, I'm so interested in what this error is about. Permission to this is denied, because I think it's really, really confused me with my personal account, which is like a bit of a unique error today. So that's okay. I'm gonna try to understand this. If I'm not wrong, there's like a version of setting a remote origin. I'm gonna try a new thing, which is to set your remote origin, but also enter what username you want to use when you set that remote origin. So in part 2 of this series, we talked about how you can set a remote origin for your repository. And maybe by default, I set my remote origin as my personal account, but I'm gonna try set the remote origin, this time under my Nextwork account. I think how you do this is you go into your repository and then you copy the HTTPS here. And then you have to write your username in front of the URL. Oh. I think it's going. Oh my gosh, I wonder what was the URL I needed to run. It was like net nextwork1 at the URL like this. Oh, that was the wrong protocol. Oh. Oh. It was to go get remote, set URL, origin. Okay, and then here, I think I'm gonna ask ChatGPT to this. I might ask ChatGPT what we can do to solve this error. So, what do you think ChatGPT is gonna say? I'm actually quite curious. Oh, can you see? Okay. What do you think ChatGPT is gonna tell us? Okay, I'm gonna say, ChatGPT, I need help. It says protocols not supported. I think what I was wanting to do is actually just to push code that I've saved. And let's say we're gonna prompt ChatGPT. Can you write a step-by-step guide for resolving this error I'm running into this error while trying to push code into a remote repository? What's gonna happen? Sorry for the detour, team. I know this is adding time to our project demo today. It seems like, oh, it's running through the same kind of lines that I've done before. Okay. Okay, so how do I change my GitHub identity from this one, my personal one, to my work one? Let's see. Okay, so we have some similar commands here about unsetting our credentials. So I'm gonna try run this again. Okay, so we're gonna unset credentials that GitHub has stored for us, and then we can set new credentials. This seems a little sus, guys. I'm not too sure if this is going to work. It gives me these commands as well to set my local git config, but I don't think this is what's gonna solve it here. It's like your local git permission settings, which isn't quite what we're looking for today. So I'm gonna have to tell. I wonder if this is related to our code connection. Maybe I do need to use another method of connecting to my own GitHub repository. Super stuck. I wonder what's gonna happen. I would say, how do we push this code up? I would have thought it's because of our code connection that would be logged in for us. And maybe I should check my connection. So I'm gonna go back into code connection. And see whether or not my connection can be fixed. It's strange. This is a little strange today. I would have thought that we could push. Okay, so I see some new kind of commands from ChatGPT here saying we could try to check our credential helper. We could try to remove our credentials. Okay, they don't even exist. So maybe there's somewhere else. Or we can flush the cache? I wonder what this would do. I don't know if we could actually flush anything when there's nothing in our credential helper. So we're gonna see, can we force Git to prompt for credentials? Okay, we can try. So we can go git URL, and then we can go run this command. And let's see if I can add in my username, netnextwork1. And let's run that here. Git remote set URL origin, run that, and then try pushing again. Is it gonna ask? Maybe this one's gonna work. This was actually the command that I was looking for, so I hope it works this time. So I think I botched the command when I tried to run it without help, because I'd run my username at the rest of my my repository's URL. But turns out I was actually supposed to run the repository URL and put netnextwork1 at github.com. Shall we try running this? Should we try pushing our code again? Doesn't seem to push now. This is quite strange. I wonder what's gone wrong here. Let me try setting the remote URL once more, and then pushing once more. I guess we could tell ChatGPT and say, hey, git push is not working at the moment. We stay stuck running the line git push, running the command git push, with no response from the terminal. I have a feeling all of this help guidance is something that I've just run, so it makes me feel a little uncertain about whether this is right. But let's see. Oh my goodness, that's why git push was stuck. I didn't even realize there was something up here that was waiting for me to enter. So I think when I was running git push and we just stayed stuck, it was actually something at the top that I needed to notice. So we might just need to fix this by entering a password. Now, as you might remember, manually entering a password is not going to work. You actually need to enter a personal access token. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to generate a personal access token here and put that in. I just realized, yeah, no wonder. Setting up CodeBuild and that CodeStar connection had no relationship with this local environment, because the CodeStar connection and logging in over the GitHub app, that was just between GitHub and CodeBuild. It's not quite for our development environment, which is why that was irrelevant to this. Let's generate a new token, and I'm going to sign in now. I'll just sign in here, and I'll create a new, what's it called? A new personal access token so that I can paste it. Okay, so this personal access token is going to say 7, and the note is for, what is the note? I would say we generated this for the AWS-DevOps CodeBuild updated project, and then we generated this to allow an EC2 instance to access this repo, our web app repo for NextWorks project. All right, and it's gonna access our repo. I really hope this works now. Let's generate the token and see if this is going to help us. I'm gonna delete this token right after this for security, so we'll be all good. Now, let me just try paste this as my password. And let me try push it. And I think it's pushed actually. My goodness, is that it? Have we resolved the error? I think we have. Let's go back to our repository, and you will know the error has been resolved if we could push our code. Wow, I hope this works, team. That was a bit intense. Let's see if it works. I'm gonna refresh now, and I'll see if our code's in here. Amazing. Wait a second, what? It says it's been pushed 23 minutes ago? Was it pushed this whole time? That's crazy. If it was pushed this whole time and spent 23 minutes trying to resolve an error that didn't actually matter. That's insane. What's going on? Well, that was a huge 23-minute detour on how you might be able to use ChatGPT to resolve errors when you run into errors trying to push changes to GitHub. Oh man. Oh man. I think this is rude. How was this pushed 23 minutes ago? But now that it's pushed, I mean, I really can't complain too much. Now that it's pushed, let's just hope that our CodeBuild project is gonna work this time around. So we failed last time. Why did we fail last time? I know that was a big detour. So we failed last time because we had an error that said our buildspec.yml file does not exist. It's because CodeBuild went straight to our GitHub repository and it says, yo, where's your buildspec file? And we're like, oh, my bad. Yeah, buildspec file is inside our, we created the buildspec file and we decided to push it to GitHub so that next time when CodeBuild decides to build this project, it can actually find buildspec. So ideally, we don't see this error anymore by retrying the build and seeing whether we can actually build our project now. Okay, let's see. In this step, we will build our project again and again. Until we see that CodeBuild successfully built our project. Yeah, so right now we still have a failure, but I have confidence that we can solve this next one too. So let's have a look at what happened this time around. So we have a new failure, but this time the failure is different. It says, YAML file error, expected discard path to be of Boolean type, found no next work instead at line 22. So we've got a discard path in our YAML file. So let's have a look at buildspec.yml and let's see what's gone wrong. So it says that it was looking for discard paths to be of Boolean type. Is it here? Oh my gosh, that's a typo from me, team. I hope this didn't make it into the project guide. Did it make it into the project guide? No. All right, it says discard paths no, that's the correct version. And look, as much as I love committing here, I'm gonna show you guys that there is like another way that you can commit and push changes if you like. So another way you can do things is by going directly into the GitHub website, and you can press the edit this file icon and edit the file directly here. This is another way that you can do things. And now that I've updated it to be discard paths is no, let's commit the change, and you can just commit and push the change here. So this is another way that you can quickly make edits to what's in GitHub. And now that I've done that, I should be able to build it one more time. And I'm just visiting the chat while we wait, because I can see that we have Timtimol AI Studio saying I can't find the CodeBuild connection. And we also have, oh, okay. We also have Timtimol AI Studio's error. And also Sachin, just letting you know the settings.xml file, this error could be something that is a part of the project. So let me know if you still see this error after you make it to the end of the project. I'm curious to know. And for Timtimol AI Studio, if you can't find the CodeBuild connection for IAM to add permission, so is this the policy that you can't find right now? If you can't find the policy, I can show you how you can create a new one. But this is totally possible to fix. You got this. Okay, so we've got our failure, and let's go visit what the failure is this time. And there we go. This is a failure that I've been waiting to see, because this is the last, I hope, last error that we're going to resolve together. So here, this is the error that I'm talking about, Sachin. You know, your settings.xml file is a part of the project today. We are expecting to see this error because at the moment, CodeBuild can't access the settings.xml file. This isn't completely true. It makes it sound like there's an error with accessing it, you know, error while executing this command. But actually what's happening here is that inside your settings.xml file, do you remember what's in there? Inside your settings.xml file are details for accessing CodeArtifact. So if CodeBuild doesn't have access to CodeArtifact, it's going to run into an error. So let's just recap that. My second build also failed, but with a different error that said CodeBuild, that said we failed to run an error while executing the command to compile our web app, which was this command. So again, I know this error might sound like there's something wrong in the file, but actually it means there's something wrong in the permissions, because settings.xml is all about the connection to CodeArtifact. So if we have an error with the settings.xml file, the first thing we should think about is whether or not we actually even have permission to CodeArtifact. Because if we don't have permission, then there's no way for us to actually run those commands properly or run those instructions properly. So to fix this error, we need to add a new policy to CodeBuild that grants CodeArtifact permissions. Great. So that's all done. Let's head on over to the IAM console over here, and let's set up a role for us. So, let's stay in this role, sorry. This is our CodeBuild role that gives us access to code connections, which is access to GitHub. And now we actually just want to add another permission here. Do you remember the permission we gave to CodeArtifact? We want to give that same permission to CodeBuild. So, the permission we gave to our EC2 instance to access CodeArtifact. We want to give that same privilege to CodeBuild now. We're like, CodeBuild, you can also have access to CodeArtifact now. Let's give that a go. So we've selected that. We've given CodeBuild the access to CodeArtifact over this permission, this privilege. And we are going to, I know there's a bit of stuff to scroll through, but now that we've given it access, let's try to build our project one more time. So let's retry the build. Go, you got this. Okay, so if everything goes well, it should be a success this time. Let's hope CodeBuild actually has access now. Yeah, and Sachin, for yourself, have you given CodeBuild a role that gives it access to CodeArtifact? Do you want to give that a try? Asuma, are we actually live? You're following. Oh, very nice, Asuma. Nice to see you here. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. Oh, okay, so we've still got a command execution error today. And I think our CodeBuild role should have access to CodeArtifact. So this should be okay. Let's see, was there something I did wrong there? I don't think there's anything still wrong with our... I don't think there's still anything wrong with our settings.xml file, unless there's something wrong there. Should we try? Let's have a look at what's wrong, what's happening in our settings.xml file. Next for DevOps CI/CD. Is this the right settings.xml file? Let me see. I'm feeling a little suspicious today of it. CodeArtifact auth token, that looks correct to me. And if you wanna, it seems like the command, the error came from compiling it, but I thought compiling it was fine. So let me just run this compiling command locally to see if there are any errors locally, and there aren't. So there's an error while executing this command, but we don't get that error when we're running it locally. So what could be the error? Do we have to go into CloudWatch? Should we go try see our build errors? Down build failure. So if I were to read this entire build error, it tells me next for dash DevOps CI/CD that's unauthorized. Does it still think it doesn't have permission? Should I just... Oh, I'm so interested in finding out what happened. What would happen if I give CodeBuild, if I just retry this one more time? I'm just gonna retry this and see whether or not it was because the IAM role permissions didn't register in time. I appreciate that it's been a while and that we've been looking at different kinds of errors for a bit now. So I understand that this is like stretching out to be a bit longer than what the project initially planned for. So if you're still here, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sticking through it. And yeah, errors happen all the time. So I'm really, really like keen to just figure out how we can solve this together. Yeah, I really think the error started with not having access. US East 2. Oops. Could it be... I think my settings file is correct, unless there's an error in our... settings file? If I were to check our settings file... I did push everything correctly, so I don't think that's the issue. What if I gave CodeBuild full permissions to CodeArtifact? Did it need more permissions? Did it not have enough? What if I gave it like admin access, which is a lot of permissions to give, but would that solve any permissions error that it's having right now to CodeArtifact? And I would just like to make sure that this is referencing the correct command. Is it? So if I were to visit my repository and I tried to view the connection instructions here, is this correct? Maybe it's not. Domain. Oh, no way. I think, is this export command wrong? Okay, let me just update the export command in our build spec file and see if this makes a difference. So what I've done there is I've just had a look at the build spec file, and I noticed that the export line is slightly shorter than what you might usually see inside here. So maybe there was an error in the template that we're using today. So let me try to rebuild this and see if that fixes things. Because I wonder if that's the reason why we can't seem to get access. Feels a little strange, guys. I'm not too sure what's going on. I wonder what's going on today. Maybe that's why. Maybe it's because of an error in the build spec file. I have a feeling that maybe because there's an error in the build spec file, that middle EC2 instance that's supposed to compile and compress our files couldn't do it properly because the command to get access to our CodeArtifact repository was botched, which means that our CodeBuild instance couldn't actually get access to the CodeArtifact repository. It doesn't matter whether or not the CodeBuild role has access. It matters more that the command we ran in that build spec file was correct. Oh my goodness, I think we resolved it. I think I'm gonna cry. I might just cry. Oh, we had a... This is probably the trickiest success I've ever had live. Oh my goodness. Team, I think we did it. That is the craziest error journey I think we've ever had. Whew. We did it though. So we're just gonna go ahead. No, just kidding. I'm feeling so relieved right now. I'm feeling so glad that we got to resolve that. And it really seems like the error lies in the build spec file, which is making me shake my head, because this is something that the project ideally would have gotten right from the first go. I am glad we troubleshooted it together, but I understand that it might be quite confusing and it might be time consuming if this took a bit of time. So thank you so much to everyone that stuck through this with me. And I hope that was informative, how we could troubleshoot it. In the end, what really helped me with troubleshooting it and getting it right was trying to figure out exactly what are the steps between compiling your web app and then trying to build it. So the real core issue that really made me look at this was the fact that we could compile properly here. Our local environment could compile. But then you're telling me that the same command didn't work for CodeBuild. There's only going to be one possible reason why that command could run locally and not for CodeBuild. It's if we actually had the correct permissions locally, but CodeBuild didn't have the correct permissions. And then we split that error down again. Okay, so we're saying CodeBuild doesn't have permissions. There's two ways CodeBuild gets permissions. One is the IAM role we gave CodeBuild. The next one is trying to figure out whether or not it has the correct authentication token, because authentication to our CodeArtifact repository comes from those two arms. You need both, the IAM role to even access CodeArtifact, and then the specific token for the repository you want to access. So now that we've checked that our IAM role was honestly fine, like we even gave it admin access, so it definitely should have access to CodeArtifact. If it was still failing, then it was definitely the second arm that was wrong. The token was not correct. And that's the reason why we ended up looking at the token that was inside the buildspec file, and we identified that, the token was not retrieved properly, so there was an error in the buildspec file. So that's a recap of how we kind of got to the solution together today. And yeah, thanks for sticking through it. Let's take a screenshot of CodeBuild showing a success, and let's add that to our documentation. This one is well deserved today, guys. So thanks so much. That was awesome. Let's bring that in. And let's answer our project. Let's answer this question in our project. To resolve the second error, what were we supposed to do here? I've gone so lost in the error. Oh, okay. To resolve the second error, we attached a policy for accessing CodeArtifact to our CodeBuild role. When we built our project again, we saw a success. With the privileges to CodeArtifact granted by the role, CodeBuild now has access to the repository. So that's awesome. Oh, sorry, I burped. Okay, so that's it. I think we've succeeded. The last thing to do here is to visit your S3 bucket, and let's open that in a new tab over here. And let us visit our CI/CD bucket to see if we have an artifact in there. And there we go, there we have it. This is that one single compressed file that CodeBuild was set out to do. This cute little file is the result of 3 hours of work. And yes, it's gonna pay off in the next project. So then the next project, Code Deploy, is gonna first start by grabbing this file and then deploying it so your web app is available to the world. So seeing this cool little file inside this bucket is just amazing. I'm very, very glad to see it, and I hope that you can see it too. If you can't see it, make sure to keep refreshing, because it might take a bit of time for the object to land in your bucket, okay? So now that it's here, we can say that we've verified the build. So to verify the build, we checked our artifacts bucket and S3. Seeing the build artifact tells me that CodeBuild was a success. The build process compiled the code from the source repository, which is GitHub, compressed it into a file, and stored that file in our S3 bucket. Okay, all done. So that's it for today's project. My goodness, that was a marathon and a half. I really, really enjoyed it. I honestly learned so much from CodeBuild Live doing this with you all today. Now, for anyone that wants to take on the extra challenge of automating testing too, I opened this secret mission to you. You can experience the full power of CodeBuild by going beyond just building and adding testing to your automated workflow. So this is a secret mission that gives you access to extra steps that lets you create a simple test for your Java web app. Try to add that test into your CodeBuild process and then see how CodeBuild naturally just brings that into every single time that your build project runs. It's a great, great, great project to really see just what you can do with CodeBuild. because we've done the building part today, but the testing part is another side of CodeBuild that you can explore. So this is your invitation to try this secret mission. Let me know how you go. If you get stuck, we're always right there in the community as well. All right, so now that we're done, we can delete everything. And luckily for us, all that code is inside GitHub. So the next time we do this project, everything is already set up in GitHub in terms of our web apps code. And in terms of our resources, let's go ahead and delete things that we no longer need. And we'll start with our CodeBuild project. So head back into CodeBuild and then select Build Projects from the left-hand navigation panel, and we'll delete our CodeBuild project. So let's select the project, let's select Actions, and let's select Delete. Let's type in delete here and select delete. Okay, so that's CodeBuild project done. Next one is S3, so we need to empty everything in S3 first. Let's first start by deleting the artifact that's inside, because we need to make sure our bucket is empty when we delete it. And let's just delete the artifact. Crazy to just delete it straight away after we've created it. But the fact that the process works is the key here. We figured out the process. Next time we do it, it's going to be in half the time, if not a third of the time. I have confidence in us. So you can now delete the bucket when that's done. And then delete the bucket. Okay, and that's all done. And then we have our development instance that we can delete. So you can open up EC2. Under instance state, you can terminate it like this and terminate your bucket, terminate your instance. Then while we wait for that to delete, you've got all of your IAM resources that you can delete. So the CodeBuild service role, you can delete that straight away. Next up, what other roles did we create today? Do you remember? There was EC2 instances. There was one that we created to give it access to CodeArtifact, so we don't need that anymore. So let's delete that one. What else should we delete? There's also the policy. So let's delete the policies. Oh, no, not CodeStar, sorry. The policy was the CodeArtifact. So our consumer policy, we don't need anymore. And let's delete that now. And then this is the CodeBuild code connection policy that I think one of us really wanted. So Tim Timo's AI Studio. I'm deleting it now, but I've just made sure that I take a screenshot of it so that you can also see it now if you like to use this policy and create it from scratch. So let me select delete for this, and let's delete this code connection policy we no longer need. And then we have CodeArtifact resources that we can delete. So let's go ahead and delete CodeArtifact. The repository we no longer need. And I think we can delete the domain as well. Oh, I think there's another repository to delete here. There we go. So let's delete that. And then delete the domain. Cool. And then you have your local files that you can remove. So these are the local files that represent your private key that we launched at the start. So let's go ahead and delete that entire folder. We don't need that anymore. So goodbye folder. Thank you so much for your help today. And then we're just gonna clear it out. All done. So congratulations, and we're just gonna wrap up with a quick reflection before we download our documentation. Key services we used include CodeBuild today, Code Connection, CodeArtifact, S3, EC2, my goodness, GitHub, and VS Code. Key concepts we learned: include the build process, my goodness, resolving Git issues in the terminal. That was gnarly. What else did we learn? We also learned about buildspec.yml file. That was quite important. And also using code connections to, what else are we using code connections to? To connect AWS with GitHub. All right, this project took us, oh no, this is where I admit it. This project took us approximately 3 hours to do, including troubleshooting time, which was pretty immense. The most challenging part was resolving the Git permission issues. Took a few commands to get there. And let me actually finish this here so we can all see it in the big screen. But it was also most rewarding though to, ooh, is this working? Oh no. I don't think I can click into this right now. Okay, let me try this. Okay. Took us approximately 3 hours. Oh, I think my cursor is just gone. All right then, challenge accepted. This project took us approximately 3 hours to do, including demo time. The most challenging part was, I would say, was resolving the Git issues. In the terminal. And it was most rewarding to see the build succeed at the end. That was awesome. Okay, so next up, thanks so much for doing this project. This project definitely was a step up in troubleshooting. But it was awesome to resolve them together as a team. We did this project today to complete day 4 of the 7-day DevOps challenge. This project met our goals, and we now have a great amount of experience in how CodeBuild works and all the intricate details in terms of permissions, and GitHub. So we're doing the next project tomorrow. I hope to see you there. And I'm excited. I think we're getting really, really close to the CI/CD pipeline. I know this project kind of took a lot of energy to resolve all those errors. So if you're feeling it, you're like, oh my gosh, that was intense, just know that that is a huge part of the learning process, and you're gonna see yourself understand all these errors so much quicker next time. So you should be so proud of yourself. Well done on configuring a CI pipeline, and let us download our documentation. Okay. I can see we have a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to resolve this while we wait for our documentation. Okay, so we have file does not exist in that path by Sachin. Crazy error. I have a few questions here, Sachin, and we can keep talking in the community if it's not resolved in this live. Totally okay. First question is whether or not you've pushed your settings.xml file into your GitHub repository. So that's the first question. Second question is if you want to check your build spec file. Your build spec file is going to have a bunch of like different references to settings.xml. Just check if there are any typos. Typos can make a really big difference into whether or not a file could be found in the path. So give that a go. And if you're like me and you copied over that export command, please update that export command in the way that I did. I'm going to update the project guide right after this, but that typo still exists in our build spec template right now. So if you're using that build spec template, just update that export command so that you're using the correct one. And this is the export command that I'm referencing. This one, copy directly that command from step 3 of your CodeArtifact connection window and replace what was in the template with the one that was in your connection window. Just have a go at doing that, and maybe that will resolve your error as well. Sending you all my best, Sachin. Thanks so much for sharing it with me. And we'll stay in touch in the community. Let me know if you've already updated this export command. I think that's the key one. All right, so where was I? I think we were just about to just check out our documentation today. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna download it as a PDF today and save our documentation as a PDF. And let's also generate the LinkedIn post. Let's see the LinkedIn post. Whoa. It feels nice to like see a LinkedIn post that just automatically summarizes everything that you've done. And yeah, this is exactly what we did. We created and configured a CodeBuild project, created an S3 bucket, defined the build process with build spec, troubleshooted some errors, and also a highlight that you can edit and make your own. Don't forget to press X, close that little preview, and let's add a new document here and just upload the documentation we just created. And while that uploads, let's open that documentation in a new tab and see it. Amazing. So this is the documentation that you created in today's project. So good. Now I love it. I love it. So we can see how you have done every single step in CodeBuild. There's even your build spec file that you can showcase and the success that you created at the very end. So that's awesome. You should be so proud of yourself, and a big high five from me to you if you got to this stage and you can see CodeBuild working properly. Now, in terms of your documentation, you can just write a quick little definition here, continuous integration with CodeBuild, and then select done so that it's a part of your LinkedIn post. So that's how you can share it on LinkedIn. And don't forget, if you have a Nextweek portfolio, to save it in your Nextweek portfolio too. So my Nextweek portfolio puts together all of the projects that I've done in this series, in the 7-day challenge. So I'd highly recommend checking it out so you also get to see just how amazing all your projects look together. So let me click the link to my portfolio and share it with you guys there as well. All right, so here's my portfolio. I'll just add that to the chat so you can all access it. And thanks, Sachin, for keeping us posted. Let us know how you go. All right, team, that is a wrap for today's live. I had so much fun, I really did. And yeah, I really appreciate everyone for spending the time to do all that troubleshooting. First thing I'm gonna do is update that build spec template that's in the project guide, and hopefully that gets a lot of us unstuck in the same places. Cool. If you have any errors, just know that the Nextweek community is here to help. In fact, I'm just gonna chuck a little cheeky link to the Nextweek community. So if you're watching this live and you're like, oh wait, I just ran into an error, don't forget that you can always check out the I Have a Question channel, and you'll get help as well. You'll get help and support from the rest of the community. Sachin, I see yours right here. Too good. All right, I'll see you in the community, everyone. Again, congratulations for doing this project today, and I'll see you in the next one in Code Deploy, where we finally make the web app public to the world. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.